shiny sports beam was speeding down the motorway. Old rock rumbled from the speakers, drowned out by the roar of the engine. The electronic panel flashed an incoming video of a young guy's face. A man in his 40s slowed down slightly and turned down the sound. What had happened? Have the partners finally confirmed the delivery date, he thought. Mr. Smith, the date has been confirmed for 23rd May, the assistant said. 12 o'clock exactly, he said. Right, great. I'm on my way to the office. How's it going in there? We're good. We're going to order a pizza and get the paperwork done. I got it. I'll be there soon. The man ended the call and turned the music volume back up. The 23rd is only a week away. We have to make it look like a family. All right, a wife shouldn't be too hard to find. What about a daughter or son? Sam wondered. Flakes of snow began to fall from the sky. I had to slow down while the wipers worked hard. The car obediently turned off the track, and the roar of the engine was replaced by a quiet rumble. The snow intensified, and the businessman had to move closer to the steering wheel to avoid hitting anyone. He looked carefully at the pavement, watching for inattentive pedestrians. Suddenly, he spotted a girl selling dairy products on the curb. Oh, that's what I need. I'll get some milk for those gluttons, before they ruin their stomachs with pizza, he thought. The car pulled up to the curb. The saleswoman looked to be about 18 or 19, no more. Snowflakes were falling on the scarf tied round her head, smiling sweetly. The girl told Sam about the products. The man couldn't bear to hear her grinning tooth to tooth from the cold. He stood in his fur collar coat, but the frosty air tickled his nose unpleasantly. She had only a simple coat. I'll wrap it up for you, she said. The man looked at the small counter in surprise. The girl was confused for a moment. You probably have a large family. I'll pack everything up quickly. A shy smile ran across her lips, blue from the cold. At that moment, Sam had an epiphany. He looked closely at the girl's face. Gray eyes, blonde strands of hair covered by a scarf. This could be the way out. Sweet young lady, I don't want to scare you, Sam began. The girl continued to stack the products, but turned to the customer. I have to look like a family man at a few work meetings, and I've got everything but a family. Maybe you could help me out. I'll pay, sure. The girl stared at him wide-eyed, her cheeks flushed with color, and she lowered her gaze shamefully. I'm sorry, but I can't. She chose her words carefully and tied the sour cream packet as slowly as if she were walking on thin ice. Oh, you misunderstood me. I must have put it poorly. I'm not a maniac. Sam ran to the parked car and hastily pulled out his passport. Look, this is my passport. You can take a picture of it and give it to a reliable person. You'll need to pose as my daughter for a week, just a couple or 3 hours a day. Well, if only for a few hours, I think I can. The girl pointed her phone at the passport and took a few pictures. My mom is ill, and I'm taking care of her, so I can't leave for a long time. You'll be a great help. What's your name? Cynthia. Sam, you got a deal. I have to go now, but I'll call you. We'll talk details then. Sam took numerous bags of groceries in both hands. And if you don't mind, I'll have to go and buy you some suitable things beforehand. You can keep them later. I don't need them. I don't need them. Sam grinned. He was very pleased with himself. It had been so easy to resolve an issue that had been plaguing him for months. Ever since the branch negotiations had started, he felt a rush of spirits. The heated steering wheel was the best invention of mankind. Only 10 minutes in the cold, and already you need to warm up. It was different when he was young, he thought. The car rolled slowly down the avenue, and the man's thoughts drifted back to his youthful years. Then he had nothing at all. True, his clothes had been warm after all. His parents would never allow him to walk around in clothes beneath their status, their position. At an elite economics university, he had to make an impression worthy of his family's status. But that meant nothing at the time. His youthful soul wanted something else. Not a bank account with 7 zeros or a luxurious house, in which he eventually chose only the living room as his abode. Back then, he had dreamed of higher things, of faith, justice, and of course, love. He remembered the delicate scent of lavender and soap from the long blonde hair. Involuntarily, the man took a deep breath of air. His heart clenched painfully. Sam himself did not notice how he reached the office. The man tossed the car keys to the valet. Yes, now he could afford anything he wanted. He could even go a few years without working and not deny himself anything. So what? Youth is lost. There was no one to take care of but his employees. He forced himself back to reality. A contract, a competent, Well-thought-out contract. That's what he should think about now, so that no clever lawyer would be able to pick on him. The evening passed in thought again. Sam looked at the falling snow and remembered his youth. The whiskey in his glass burned his throat. He walked over to the panoramic window and dusted off the coffee table, setting the glass between the mismatched figurines that looked like plastic trinkets and the ashtray full of cigarette butts. A cigarette slipped easily out of the crumpled packet, and the man opened the sliding door, a slim slit with a light movement. Along with the frosty air, children's screams from the neighboring house came into the room. The building itself could not be seen because of the falling snow, but that didn't stop the screams at all. Quickly finishing his cigarette, the man hurried to close the door and enjoyed the silence. Yes, better this way than to hear all these shrieks from morning till night, he thought. At least he had the freedom of choice. He took another sip and, grumbling, spat the rest into the floor pot with the withered bonsai. Tossing the damp dressing gown off the king-sized leather sofa, the man plumped tiredly into the soft embrace of his soft woman. He could have gone to the bedroom, but it made him homesick. He hadn't slept there once since Patricia had left. She was a housekeeper. He closed his eyes and remembered how tidy the place had been back then. It had been a good time. The house was filled with the smell of home-cooked food, fresh linen perfectly folded in the cupboards. The bedroom was being used for its intended purpose. Sam fell into a pleasant slumber. Outside the window there was barely a hint of dawn when Sam opened his eyes. Taking the customary 20 steps to the bathroom, he looked in the mirror in the close light. The wrinkles seemed deeper and gave him an extra dozen years, as if he should have been in his 60s by now. The electronic surface of the mirror glowed with the time 0700. All morning routines went on automatic. The ritual had become automatic over the years, and half an hour later Sam opened the door, bringing out a bag of ready-made breakfast. While the machine hummed, brewing black coffee, the man decided it would be a good idea to add cream. Greasy, but sometimes you could. From the depths of the fridge, a lone frozen courgette and several jars of sauce looked up at him. A smooth row of mineral water cans pressed against the open door. Behind them hid the cream. The man took the Tetra Pak and took a small sip. Oh, for fuck's sake. He hurried to spit out the bitter liquid. I'd better order the services of a housekeeper after all. The mere thought of shopping made Sam uncomfortable. He didn't want to go to the mall. But there was nothing to be done. Such a delicate matter couldn't be entrusted to an assistant, and Cynthia's clothes would have made her look like an ordinary girl. Even now, she stood in slightly stretched jeans with scuffs down the front, tucked into rough boots. A gray jumper was visible from beneath an unbuttoned-down jacket. She pulled off her hat and waved to Sam. Hey, Cynthia. You ready to go? Ready. Sam, the girl, lowered her eyes. She was probably embarrassed to call the man by his first name. He was old enough to be her father. But don't worry, it's just a bit of theater. And I'm your partner on the set. The man put his finger up, emphasizing his involvement in a great art. Slow rhythmic music was blasting through the mall, forcing shoppers, like ants caught in a clever trap, to walk endlessly between shiny shop windows and miles of colorful clothes. The escalator finally reached the top floor. This was where the most expensive boutiques were located, and it was much less crowded than the lower levels. Sam cherished the thought that very soon he would be able to sit down in a comfortable chair, and a pleasant employee would bring him a cup of coffee. And so it happened. As soon as they entered the first shop and explained the purpose of their visit, Sam was seated in a comfortable leather chair, and now all he had to do was evaluate the outfits. The process was going well. Cynthia obediently measured everything that was brought to her, and soon cardboard shopping bags began to multiply near Sam. They had to change several shops so that the brands would be different. Sam knew all too well the society he would be traveling to. Those rich kids were eagle-eyed about all the new collections, and if they suspected something wrong, they would quickly uncover the deception. Then the contract he'd been working towards for years would slip through his fingers. Cynthia carefully picked up another black velvet handbag decorated with ornate silver patterns. Sam nodded contentedly to the saleswoman, confirming that she should be packed as well. When at last he was sure that the girl was absolutely sure to be dressed as a rich heiress, he was relieved. It was necessary to finalize everything by stipulating the details. A small, dark restaurant on the same floor suited him just fine. Cynthia, look, it's a business meeting, but my partners are traditionalists, and they're all about family values. So you're supposed to be my daughter. Tell me a little bit about yourself so I know what kind of legend to make up. The man sipped his tea. I don't have much to tell. I work as a milkmaid. Now my mom is ill, and I had to look for a job near her house to take care of her. And when I have time, I sell my products. So it's a small business. The girl blushed and giggled. Did you study or go to school? Sam had a strange feeling that the girl's speech was too smooth and correct, without accent and common expressions. Milkmaids don't speak like that. Yes, I entered the history of art, but I had to take an academic course. Hopefully next year I'll be able to return to my studies. Wow, good for you. But you're just like me, grinned the man. Why don't you have a family? I should probably find out more about you too, so that I can be prepared. Well, she doesn't need that information, of course. Well, I'll just have to tell her to relax a bit, Sam thought. I had a woman I loved once, but that was a long time ago. Then business, work. I didn't have time, and now I'm old, no one wants me. So you're a lone wolf? You could say that. The businessman smiled. During the time spent in the restaurant, Sam had managed to get Cynthia to talk a little, and his worries receded into the background. The girl's speech was pleasant. She possessed a slight irony. Their conversation flowed easily, and this inspired hope for the successful future of the deal. However, talking to a nice young girl, and even in such an unusual way, was new to the man. It was not the same as giving tasks to subordinates. All this fuss made Sam feel a migraine coming on. It would have been nice to take Cynthia home, but there was no more energy left for that. God bless whoever invented the taxi. Sam was relieved to see the red taillights of the yellow, checkered car moving away. That night, the headache kept Sam awake. He tried to find some pills to relieve the attack, but they ran out, as always, at the worst possible moment. He closed the cap of the empty pillbox and threw it in the rubbish bin. At first, he wanted to call his assistant, who could bring him what he needed. But at the last moment, he remembered that he'd just had a baby. Pulling him over in the middle of the night now would be too much. Sam flicked through the contact list on his phone and discarded it. A string of women's numbers, and no one to text. Either asleep or having fun like they'd had with him. Patricia would probably come and help him, but that would be too low. He remembered her tear-stained face when he told her he didn't love her. The pain clenched his temples even tighter. You old goofball, Sam thought, grabbed his phone and quickly dialed the number of the pay clinic. When you have money, you can afford to be lonely. In just 10 minutes, the friendly nurses gave Sam a strong injection, and the pain receded. You'll sleep like a baby tonight, smiled the young nurse. That's right, like a 45-year-old baby, he grinned. The car was quietly making its way along the off-road track. Cynthia, seeing the car, waved hello. Sam responded machine-like. Behind the girl's back stood a sturdy little house covered in snow. Now she looked unnatural against this background, like a bright spot against the gray industrial zone. The wheels slowed down next to a pair of beautiful light-colored boots with a small heel. The girl flicked back her blonde long strands and got into the car. Sam stood still for a moment, ogling her with his gaze. Careful, inconspicuous makeup, shiny hair, elegant manicure. Clothes only completed the image. Cynthia looked fresh and beautiful. Cynthia, you look great. Thank you, Sam, I'm really so excited. Not Sam, Daddy, the man put his finger up, reminding us of their arrangement. Yeah, Dad, the girl laughed. Everything's going to be fine, I'm sure. Okay, just a reminder, Mom's in Aspen skiing. The roads got snowed in, and she couldn't make the flight. And you're staying with me, your favorite daddy, getting ready for your winter session. I honestly don't think anyone will ask too much, but just in case, Cynthia nodded decisively and made a gesture with her hand to her forehead, emphasizing that she was ready to follow instructions. I thought about calling me Cynthia. That's what my mom usually calls me, but I like the sound of it. The wheels slowly spun and the car set off on its adventure, supporting Cynthia under his arm. The man entered the small hall. The stage was hidden by a red velvet curtain, and there were tables in front of it. One large one was in the center and flanked by several smaller ones. An obliging steward waved his arms cheerfully. When he saw Sam, he shook his hand vigorously and inclined his head politely. Introducing Cynthia, he led them to a group of people standing a little further away. At the most crucial moment, Cynthia squeezed Sam's hand more firmly, and he patted her shoulder encouragingly. The introductions to his partners went even better than he thought they would. The men greeted each other and introduced themselves to the girl. We'll have something to discuss now. You go and see what's interesting, Sam said. Okay, Cynthia's voice was higher than usual. She doesn't like to go out much, Sam said quietly, watching his fake daughter walk confusedly towards the young people. She's adorable, remarked a tall, dark-haired man with glasses, looking at his mate. The hours would be like that. I might sleep better, replied the latter. The men laughed. "You can't expect any good from these kids," Sam said. He pictured Cynthia as a young sheep walking into a clearing that was already surrounded by predators ready to attack. But turning around briefly, he saw that the young people were absorbed in their phones, the light reflecting on their faces. Sam sat down in one of the vacant chairs. "Well, nice, we can relax," he thought. The meeting went well, and soon the most important but no less boring part of the presentation with the reports came to an end. The presenter received his applause for the work he had done, and the staff carried the presentation materials off the stage. Sam sighed contentedly. It was now down to the buffet. A host of waiters in perfectly fitting press suits crowded the room. Champagne bubbles in tall glasses played on their trays. They approached each guest. A variety of hors d'oeuvres, canapes, fruits, cheeses, and many other delicacies were brought out on the tables. Cynthia timidly approached Sam. "Champagne." The waiter leaned over her. "Oh, no, thank you. I don't drink," replied Cynthia. "Mr. Smith, how did you manage to raise such an angel?" The man with the glasses and his short companion looked at each other. "It was her mom. It's a pity she couldn't join us. If you'd seen her, you'd have realized what she was like." Sam lied. It wasn't the first time he'd lied. Otherwise, how would he have built his empire? He winked at the one with the glasses. His speech sounded so convincing that there was no doubt about the truth of his words. "You two look so much alike," one face to the other, came from behind the men. A woman's squeal sounded in the corner where the children of the other businessmen had settled. There was some excitement going on there. A waiter was hastily wiping the spilled champagne off the table. A girl in a long blue floor-length dress was reprimanding him, pointing out that this dress cost more than his annual salary, and if the champagne got on it, he would be in trouble. The girl was immediately rushed to the girl by her mother, an elegant blonde in a gorgeous gold dress. The brilliance of her outfit was overshadowed only by the diamond pendant resting regally on her chest. "Those are mine," sighed tiredly the brunette in glasses, and, draining his glass in one fell swoop, set off in the direction of the conflict. In the evening, Sam uncorked a bottle of collectible cognac saved for a special occasion. The tea-colored drink filled the plump cognac glass. The cooling stone soap cubes went there as well. Today had gone very well. Sam was extremely pleased with himself. Cynthia had done even better than he'd expected. Well, good for her. She didn't let herself get hurt, Sam thought. He remembered the first time he had met the children of rich parents. He'd been one himself. His father and mother, being big businessmen, often took him to such banquets, and he always felt like a show dog. It was hard for him to get along with his peers. All they did was to list their parents' regalia and brag about who had more expensive things. Yes, who was on what holiday in which resort. The boy had heard these identical conversations so often that they made him deathly bored. Cognac pleasantly burned his throat. The taste was great. I wonder what Cynthia's doing now, Sam thought. Sam brushed the thought away with a shake of his head. He twirled the phone in his hand and opened the contacts. "Hey, do you want to come over for a visit? I think I missed you." Calculating his chances of success, he selected several women's names from the list and pressed send. He got a reply from only one girl, a searing brunette with whom he had had a brief affair a couple of years ago. "Only if you're ready for something serious." And the evening could have ended differently. Sam flicked the phone away and lit a cigarette. He walked over to the window. The door slid smoothly aside. From the neighboring yard came squeals and laughter. Judging by the shouts, the family was playing snowballs. For the next meeting, Mr. Smith dressed extra carefully. The gala was to be held in one of the best restaurants in town. The premises had been fully rented for him and his partners. The man's hair was neatly styled back. A black body was around his neck, and a black tailored suit fit his figure perfectly, hiding his soft belly from prying eyes. Sam coughed and pulled back the hem of his jacket. Everything seemed perfect. He examined himself once more in the tall mirror. An executive car was waiting for him in the courtyard. The neatly dressed driver obligingly opened the door for his passenger, taking Cynthia out. The car slid gently through the city and stopped at the entrance to a restaurant with glowing lights. Sam helped the girl out of the car and, holding her under his elbow, followed the receptionist who greeted them. "Cynthia, you did great. My partners are thrilled with you." They did. I was so worried. I couldn't sleep the next night. I thought they thought I was boring. I couldn't hold a conversation. "Don't worry about it. All those cranky ones, like big kids, there's not much to talk about with them. If you don't know what to say, just say your dad's richer," Sam grinned. The couple entered the hall. The restaurant was decorated with a magnificent huge Christmas tree. It shone triumphantly against the floor-to-ceiling window, behind which snow was falling. On the opposite side was a grand piano at which a man in a tailcoat sat and played cozy classical music. "So well, do you know what to do?" Sam asked. Cynthia modestly said hello to everyone present and went to the Christmas tree, where some wives and children were already standing. Sam was pleased to note that Cynthia was carrying on a conversation with someone in the group. Soon she disappeared into the crowd. Apparently she went to the window. The first hour, as usual, passed in negotiations. Men settled into large leather armchairs around a mahogany coffee table and discussed the details of the deal. Some smoked cigars. Sam declined. He remembered coughing the rest of the day after the last time. No, this entertainment was definitely not for him. The conversation then turned once again to family values. The men shared their thoughts about how family represents a person as a good and reliable partner. "You are absolutely right," Sam nodded knowingly, remembering his father's many affairs on the side. If a man can keep his family together, what is business to him? Yeah. That's what we're talking about." The men nodded their heads in agreement. Finally, the business part was over and everyone was invited to the table. Cynthia looked elegant in a long black dress. The sleeves pulled back her thin arms, covering her wrists. A black velvet handbag with silver branches completed the look perfectly. Sam noted with pleasure how good she looked. He was genuinely glad that the girl would still have these beautiful and quality items. Waitresses in white gloves bustled around the tables and opened more and more dishes in front of the guests. Soon the table was filled with various delicacies. Sam occasionally caught Cynthia's questioning gaze. "What is it?" And he would say quietly in her ear whether it was worth trying or not. Soon they switched to talking only with their eyes. "We haven't been to that branch since," finished one of those present. Everyone laughed, and approving chuckles rolled across the table. Cynthia turned round, pointing at the baked snails. Sam grimaced, a look of disgust on his face. Cynthia giggled and kept looking around for something to try. Glasses clinked. The guests tasted different dishes and recalled stories from their lives, sharing their plans for the New Year's holidays. "Cynthia, how will you celebrate?" The man fixed his glasses, and the whole table stared at the girl with curiosity. "And the girl's voice trembled from the unexpected attention. "I'll be studying for my exams." She froze, holding a piece of chocolate dessert in her hand. Sam froze when he saw a piece of jewelry slipping out from under the sleeve of her dress. A silver bracelet with thin lines of patterns glittered on her wrist. He knew that bracelet. A restless voice snapped the businessman out of his daze. Yes, you're saying all the right things. We'll stay at home. Cynthia has to study for her exams this year." "What are you studying for, Cynthia?" "Art history." "Oh, that must be very interesting." "I've been." And then Sam heard only fragments of phrases. He was immersed in his thoughts, but they didn't add up to anything coherent, just circled like kites around that bracelet. "That's impossible. I bought it myself, and then it wasn't found." He could barely wait for the meeting to end. He wanted to escape into the frosty air, to get away from the table, from the room. But etiquette confined him to his chair. As the evening drew to a close, he said goodbye to his partners and hurried away with Cynthia under his arm to bring the car round. "Cynthia, where did you get that bracelet?" "My mom gave it to me when I was a little girl. I thought it would go with the bag." The girl looked at him with a confused look. "Mum," Sam turned back to the window. "Yeah, Mum, what's wrong with him?" "Is he ugly?" "Why do you ask?" The frightened girl saw the man turn white even in the poorly lit car. "Years ago, I bought this bracelet myself. It's handmade. There's no other like it." Outside the window, the lights of houses and cars flashed by. The twinkling, bright lights of the evening city signs. Everything blended into one huge mottled kaleidoscope that threw the man back to the memories of his youth. It was as if it was no longer the streetlights, but his years flying by. Sam remembered himself with fellow students at an elite economics university. He liked higher maths. That afternoon, he was rushing to get to his pairing when he bumped into her. He almost stepped on the foot of a beautiful girl from a parallel group. As an apology, she had agreed to go with him to the pastry shop after school. What did she take then? I think it was chocolate brownies and a milkshake. Yes, she got a little chocolate stained. The young man couldn't take his eyes off her. He looked at her angelic face and blonde hair and didn't dare to take a breath. The car pulled up in front of Cynthia's house. "Shall I go?" the girl said, or asked with slight apprehension as she opened the door. "Cynthia, I'll come round tomorrow afternoon. Will you introduce me to your mum?" "I will." Her voice sounded uncertain. Once home, Sam hurriedly pulled off her body. It seemed to tighten around his neck more and more. The tight jacket was thrown off next. It made it impossible to breathe. The man hurried to the far room. It was practically empty. Some boxes from work, blueprints, estimates were stored there. He pushed the boxes aside and discarded the scattered folders. There it was, the cherished box lay in its place. He slowly lifted the lid, his hands trembling. He carefully pushed aside a small bouquet of dried flowers, picked up the soft cloth wrapped rectangle and gently unwrapped it. Just a few old and time-faded photographs. In one of the pictures, a young Sam in shorts and a summer shirt was holding a blonde girl by the waist against the river. There was a lump in the man's throat. He reverently placed the photo on the floor beside him. In the next photo, the girl was laughing. He took a picture of her as she was making buns. Her clothes were covered in flour. Sam grinned bitterly. He remembered how she had thrown flour at him after that picture, and they had ended up cleaning flour out of the kitchen for days. The second picture lay on top of the previous one. A single photograph remained in his trembling hands. There was no one in it. Only an empty riverbank. Tears rolled down the man's cheeks. They stung his freshly shaven face and rolled down into wrinkles. His chest felt tight. Sam could no longer be there. With holy reverence in his eyes, he folded the contents of the box back up, placed the small bouquet of flowers on the soft cloth, and put the box away. The papers lying everywhere didn't bother him. He just turned out the light and wandered into the shower. The open bottle of cognac was only too glad to be remembered. It readily burned his throat and spilled bitter venom into his chest. Tonight they didn't need an intermediary in the form of a glass. Sam took a greedy sip and choked back a cough. He sat in a terry cloth dressing gown on the living room floor. The soft carpet barely reflected the dim light of the nightlight. Sam rested his head back on the couch. There was a ringing silence in the flat. It was literally suffocating the man. He felt terribly lonely. "I'm going to die like this, and no one will notice. If only a burglar had come," he thought. "Anybody here?" he shouted into the dark corridor. "There's no one here. It's just you and me," he said to himself. Another sip. My lips stung. Sam woke up with the sun shining brightly outside his window. What he loved about expensive drinks was the lack of hangover. If he drank as much cheap cognac as he could afford in his youth, his head would be cast iron today. Already automatically, he ordered breakfast and went to perform his morning rituals. Yes, the morning routine. Just like the last 20 years on autopilot. The courier brought the breakfast. The coffee machine produced a fragrant drink, and the remnants of sleep vanished like a hand. The sunlight reflected off the fluffy snowdrifts and flooded the kitchen with light. Sam looked around as if with new eyes. How could he have neglected the house like that? The entire kitchen was cluttered with incomprehensible things. Dust lay thick wherever it could fall, and there were stains of unknown origin in front of the wide glass refrigerator. He remembered that the last time he'd had a cleaner come round at least a year ago. How time flies. Whether it was the coffee, the sun, or all of them together, a wave of enthusiasm rose in the man's soul. He wrote to the administrator of a trusted agency and called for housekeeping workers. The day promised to be a very good one. He felt that his life was about to change, and change for the better. Sam met the helpers already dressed in a woolen winter three-piece suit. He wanted to get to Cynthia's house as soon as possible. The clock was already approaching 12:00, and the journey was not a long one. He organized the work, sketched out a rough menu of what he wanted to be cooked, and left suggestions for groceries. He locked the room with the documents in advance. The frosty wind burned his face. My eyes were blinded by the bright light. The car had warmed up and was ready to pull into the driveway when the gate finally opened. Sam saw that the driveway was blocked by the maintenance crews. A pipe had burst from the frost, and men in orange uniforms, shouting at each other, and not shy in their language, were digging into the manhole, from which white steam was billowing. There was no point in arguing with fate. He couldn't outrun them. He turned the ignition key and switched off the engine. The taxi didn't arrive 40 minutes later. In that time, Sam had become quite agitated and even considered walking. His cigarettes were melting in the packet, and he tapped his fingers nervously on the armrest. Finally, the chauffeur pulled up outside the gate. Happy as a 20-year-old, Sam ran to the car and waved at the driver. "Am I crazy now?" he thought to himself. Sam jumped into the back seat and looked at his house, smiling. The huge box of brick walls seemed fake and not real to him. He didn't feel like it was his home from here, outside. It seemed to him that he was just passing by it while sitting in this taxi. Modern music was playing in the cabin, further separating Sam from this arguably lonely structure. Finally, the car moved. A snowman stood in the neighbor's yard. A few minutes later, the taxi turned onto a side road and began to pick up speed. The saloon swayed gently, and it calmed the man's nerves taut as strings. Could it be that in half an hour he would meet her? It could have ended well, couldn't it? What if there had been a mistake then? He began to feel like his heart was going to jump out of his chest. I need to relax. Maybe find the words, Sam thought, unbuttoning his jacket. The adrenaline was making him hot. Thoughts were swirling in his head. His eyes were flooded with memories, and he was back in the period when his life was divided into before and after. Listen, this girl is no match for you. The gray-haired father sat behind the oak desk in his study. Helen's file was in front of him. He poked at it with his index finger. We'll find you a better match than this. Listen to you. His mother, who was pacing from side to side, couldn't stand it and ran over to young Sam. She collapsed beside him on the sofa, taking his hands in hers. Her voice sounded higher than usual. Listen, Sam, you're in love right now. That's understandable. But don't make any hasty decisions. Take a walk, go to the cinema, but don't plan anything serious. I'll decide what I'm going to do. The boy ripped his hands out of his mother's arms. I love her. His father tilted his head and rubbed his forehead tiredly. You don't realize you're going to ruin your whole life. She's from the orphanage. Think about it. She doesn't even know her parents' upbringing. She's young, she's beautiful. But as the years go by, she'll become rude. You need another wife around you. The older man was trying to get through to him, but he didn't realize that Sam had already made up his mind. Dad, I'm begging you, please don't get in my way. What are you talking about? Sam Mama gasped, looking him in the eye. Dad and I only want the best for you. Listen to me, son. Before you know it, she'll be pregnant, and we raised you to be a responsible man. You're going to leave university and work to support your family, and then your whole future is wiped out. You'll end up like a loader. The man slapped the table and pointed his finger at Sam. I'll take everything away from you. No money for you until this affair's over. Mark my word. He pounded his palm on the table. His mother only pressed her lips together in agreement. Sam remembered the fury with which he had left his parents' house that evening. He had packed his things, taken Helen in his arms, and they had driven to the very outskirts of town, to a small lakeside house with a wooden floor that they had then covered with flour. Those were the best months of his life. They chatted, it seemed, 24 hours a day about everything and nothing. They had no money at all then. Helen worked part-time in the cafeteria for a few hours after school, and Sam helped out in the coffee shop at the library. It wasn't much money, but it was enough for rent and food. In their spare time, the pair crammed for their textbooks. Sam was always surprised at how much the girl knew. It seemed impossible to find her without a book. He remembered her laughing face and the bracelet. He had bought it as a gift from a jewelry shop. The bracelet was as dainty as Helen's. Sam really wished he could have given a gold one as a gift, but he barely had enough for the silver one. And then the memory took him to the river, to the very bank where he had secretly come every year on the day of her death. We're sorry, young man, but we found your friend's belongings on the shore. We believe she drowned. Her body has not yet been found. Search operations are underway. The man took off his cap. Then it had been several days since Helen had gone missing. The boy had called all her friends, but no one had seen her. She hadn't shown up at the pulpit either. Sam didn't know what to do. He went to the orphanage where the girl grew up, hoping to find her there, but she didn't come there either. Sam remembered running towards the lake. There were several police officers standing on the shore. One was writing something down. Another was carefully lifting Helen's things with tongs. He had no sooner reached the scene of the tragedy than the strong arms of a third officer wrapped around him from behind and shackled him in an iron embrace. Easy, easy, young man. You'll spoil all the evidence. We're looking for her. Sam slumped to the ground, tears welling up in his eyes. Why did she go to that lake? What could have happened? All his questions remained unanswered. The next year, Sam did not remember himself from grief. He drank. He had to take a leave of absence from school. His parents comforted their son, but they did not hide their quiet joy. It made him sick to see them. Helen's body had never been found, and that made his broken heart even more painful. Sam couldn't calm down. He had nowhere to go to visit her grave. There was no way to say goodbye. All he had left were a few pictures in the shore of the lake. Over the years, the wound in his soul never fully healed. All those fleeting romances were like a band-aid glued on a bleeding ulcer of many years. With them, his life seemed sympathetic from the outside, but he was still that wounded beast. Perhaps only with Patricia had he tried to create anything resembling a relationship. His parents liked her a lot. The girl was quiet, homemaker, but he'd never cared for that. Looking at her, he felt no emotion. It was like watching a boring TV program. He came to the conclusion that it was cruel to the girl and confessed his lack of feelings. 10 years passed, but Sam never tried to start a family again. He opened the window and sucked in fresh air. Sam tried to get rid of the heavy memories. The body had never been found, after all. So what does that make it? Could she still be alive? It could be. Could she have lost her memory? Or could she have been kidnapped? An anxious brain was throwing up new possibilities. The man didn't know if she would recognize him, but he would recognize her for sure. He realized. Cynthia did, indeed, look like Helen when she was younger. Well, yes, of course, he'd noticed that right away. Well, of course, it had to be her for sure. Sam smiled quietly, not wanting to scare off a good feeling. The car turned onto a broken road, the wheels rumbling on the gravel, scraping the unfamiliar pavement. The driver slowed down, avoiding the potholes and potholes. The snow crunched underfoot. Sam smoked a cigarette nervously. The taxi flashed its red lights and disappeared around the corner. The man was starting to freeze when the front door finally opened. Cynthia peeked out from behind it and waved at Sam, inviting him in. The cigarette butt flew into the bin, leaving a cloud of smoke. The man headed towards his destiny. "Hello, Sam." She placed the worn slippers in front of him. "How are you doing, Cynthia? Everything all right with you?" The man saw the girl's embarrassment and wanted to lighten the mood. He hung his down jacket on one of those rusty hooks in the hallway and patted her on the shoulder. The cabin seemed even smaller inside than it was outside. However, it was not without pleasure that Sam noted that it was much cozier than his home. A small kitchen opened to the right of the hallway. Cynthia invited him in and poured tea. Sam sat down on a chair covered with a colored cape. It was obvious that the hostesses had sewn it themselves. On the table was a vase of bagels and sweets. On the opposite edge of the table lay a large stack of newspapers. Cynthia had gone to fetch her mother and disappeared into the far room. Time stood still. Not knowing where to put himself, the man picked up one of the papers. There was nothing interesting in it. News, adverts, horoscopes. Folk recipes for illnesses were written in pen. Heavy footsteps sounded behind Sam. He didn't turn round. He froze. A female figure walked heavily around him, leaning her hand on the table, and sat down heavily in the chair opposite. The aroma of tea mingled with the smell of medicine. The man looked up, his eyes rounded with surprise. It wasn't her. His heart sank into his heels. In front of him sat a woman in her 50s with dark hair and swarthy skin. Her appearance was sickly and her face was drained under the onslaught of an agonizing ailment. Cynthia carefully threw a knitted shawl over the woman's shoulders. The brown eyes of the stranger regarded the man with interest, as if studying him, testing him. Hello, Sam's voice had never sounded so timid. He could barely move his lips. What else to say? He didn't know. What a stupid thing to say. Now she probably thinks I'm some kind of maniac, he thought. "Cynthia, please leave us alone, dear." The woman stroked the girl's arm affectionately. "I need to have a word with this man. You'll have to forgive me. My leg hurts terribly." The woman stretched out the sore limb in front of her. There was a wide bandage on her knee. I'm sorry. Sam struggled for words. The woman glanced down the corridor to make sure Cynthia had gone to her room. "My name is Sandra. I know who you are. I knew right away. You two look so much alike." The woman's voice dropped to a low whisper. "I'm a friend of Helen's. I'll tell you everything that happened, but please don't say anything now." Cynthia doesn't know anything. She made herself comfortable in the armchair and poured herself some tea. "I met Helen in our village 20 years ago. She came here to work part-time. She and I shared a flat with a woman. She was a nice girl. We hit it off straight away and became friends, even though she didn't like to tell us much about herself. She was pregnant. I kept asking her where the father was, but she wouldn't tell me. I thought maybe something had happened. Maybe it's a dark story. All right, I guess it's up to you." A couple or 3 months later, she did tell me. She was living with a bloke. He was nice, she said. Smart. I loved him a lot only, she says. His parents were against it. She was no match for their son. They met her several times, demanded she disappear from his life. They even offered him money. They said she'd ruin his life and deprive him of a future. She resisted as best she could, but it only got worse. Her parents threatened her. She'd just found out she was pregnant. His parents, according to Helen, hinted that anything could happen and they wouldn't find her. And who would look for an orphan? She got scared and agreed to their terms to save the baby. So they made her pretend she'd drowned. They told her to put her own clothes on the shore of the lake. They forbade her to take anything from the house. No one realized she'd run away. They gave her some money, and then they went ahead. "So she's alive," Sam whispered, barely moving his lips. Sandra's words stabbed like sharp daggers into his shocked mind. What a fool I was. That's where their satisfied faces were coming from. They'd set it all up and watched me suffer. "So Cynthia is my daughter?" Then, yes, the woman nodded affirmatively and rubbed her sore knee. "But where is Helen? Is she alive?" "Well, honestly, I don't know. But I hope so." "How did Helen give birth?" "We'd settled down in the village for good. We worked as dairymaids. We made pillowcases to order. And then later, when Cynthia was about 2, we started going into town to work. The pay was better there. We got a job as maids, and at first it was all right. It wasn't easy work, of course, but it paid well. We left Cynthia with our landlady Nancy. Helen paid her, of course. Well, she did a good job, and she was a woman's help. And then we were sent to a new house to clean. The owners were fighting amongst themselves. They had scandals all the time. All we could do was clean up the broken crockery. Somebody died, and they were dividing up the inheritance. Well, you could see there was a lot to divide. Cynthia came through the door. "Are you all right? Would you like some more boiling water in your tea?" "I'm fine, my dear. Go and sit in the room for a while." The woman made sure the girl was gone and leaned closer to Sam. "So I got sick one day, came down with a fever, and Helen went to see them alone. I nearly went mad. She was gone for days. No phones. And where do I call? I don't know what happened. Cynthia's crying, missing her mom, and I'm barely on the mend." She came back a few days later, but she was white as a sheet, not alone, but with a bunch of detectives. They turned the house upside down, looking for something. I went to Helen to find out what had happened. Poor thing, she was shaking like a leaf. Said she'd seen a murder happen while she was cleaning the house. The owners were arguing as usual. And then there was a scuffle, and Helen turned round to see the noise. Thought maybe they should break it up. There were 2 sons fighting, and before she knew it, one of them had shot the other in the head. She lost consciousness and came to when the police woke her up. She had the gun in her hands, and she was covered in blood. So she was framed for it. I went to court, and they pinned murder and robbing a safe on her. The safe was broken into, probably looking for jewelry. Only they didn't find anything. Her lawyer was a real scoundrel. I could tell he was bribed. Didn't defend her at all. She ended up getting 20 years. That's it. The woman rounded her eyes and splayed her hands. I didn't give Cynthia away, of course. I raised her myself. She doesn't remember Helen. She thinks I'm her mother. So Helen's in prison now. I don't know, to be honest. She wrote for the first few years. Then she disappeared. I sent her so many letters and I never heard back, as long as she was alive. I even wanted to hire a detective once. I had some money saved up, but Cynthia got sick that year. I had to splurge. The woman took Sam by the elbow to pull him out of his daze. "Sam, do you know everything now? I can see you're a decent man. I'm sure you'll want to find Helen. I only ask one thing of you." She leaned in close to the businessman's face and looked him in the eye. "When you find out anything about her, let me know. It's very important to me." Sam stood in the street and stared into the snowdrift, but saw nothing in front of him. The lit cigarette smoldered slowly in his hands, and a long column of ash fell on the snow-white snowdrift. The information he received was slowly being processed and changed his perceptions of the world upside down. His beloved had not drowned. She might be alive. He has a daughter. Covering everything seemed impossible. Walking into his house, for a second he didn't realize where he had come. The house was sparkling clean. The kitchen smelled of home-cooked food. He had already forgotten about the houseworkers, just as someone had forgotten about his Helen, who had been framed. Kicking off his boots, Sam carefully pulled a folded paper from the inside pocket of his jacket. Inside was written his first name, last name, middle name, prison number, and article. It was only a few days later that Sam found out Helen was alive. The private detective told him that she had been out 5 years ago on parole, but had stayed behind to live on a settlement. Planes didn't fly there, but you could get there by rail. The nearest train was leaving in a few days. Sam couldn't think about work anymore. Apologizing to his partners, he said he would miss all the scheduled meetings, and left it all on the shoulders of his team. Every evening, the employees sent him brief reports on how the day had gone. He was very proud of his employees. He'd managed to build a solid team after all, but they were not his real family. Sam hurried to share his joy that Helen was alive with Sandra. The woman was crying tears. Sadly, he found her in an even more pitiful state than the last time he had seen her. She had been unable to get out of bed that day. It was hard for Sam to watch her agony. He called his familiar smiling nurses from the paid clinic, and a team led by a doctor of the highest category instantly arrived. After an examination, the doctor said that surgery was necessary and that it was possible to get the woman back on her feet. Sam didn't hesitate for a minute. The same day Sandra was admitted to the clinic, the doctors took tests and set a date for the operation. Sam paid for separate accommodation. The ward was like a small flat, and Cynthia was able to sleep right with her foster mom. The girl was immensely happy and kept saying that she didn't even know how to thank him. She still didn't know the truth about her origins. So Sandra convinced Sam to hang on to the big talk and find Helen and talk to her first. It was a really good idea. Sam decided to take her advice. The train rattled its wheels melodiously. Sam hadn't been on a train in a long time. Towns and villages whizzed by outside the window. There were no neighbors. The train would arrive at the right station in the morning. From there, he would go to the settlement and meet the woman he had loved for 20 years. Outside the window, another platform flashed by and disappeared into the darkness. Sam thought, if only life were this easy one day and a bad period passed, to leave behind years of loneliness, fleeting flings, or perhaps to be the first to send into the darkness parents whose cruel love broke the lives of several people at once. The conductor knocked delicately on the first-class carriage and offered tea. Sam opened the door and was pleased to note that the drink was still served in glasses with iron-carved cup holders. Already out of habit, Sam got up at 07:00. Over the years, he didn't even need an alarm clock anymore. Soon the door of the railway station slammed behind him, and taxi drivers were trying to lure him into their cars. When he gave the address, the mustached chauffeur, whom he had picked at random from the crowd, looked back at him in surprise. He looked at him with a look of incomprehension. What was such a decent man looking for in this godforsaken place? The passenger nodded back, showing that he had not misheard him and that no explanations would follow. Sam entered Terry's cave in the settlement where they were to meet Helen. He hadn't had a chance to talk to her yet, but the woman overseeing the settlement had promised to pass on all the information to Helen and that she would meet him at the cafe. The small room was paneled in light wood on the inside, and sunlight flooded the entire space. The room smelled of sweets and coffee and milk. Sam was reminded of their first trip to the sweet shop. How long ago had it been? And he remembered it like it was yesterday. Helen had indeed been there. She was sitting at a wooden table looking out the window. She was wearing a modest beige dress with a high collar. On the back of a chair hung a simple brown jacket, unnecessarily light for this time of year. Sam froze. She's alive. It's Helen in front of me, came timidly from his lips. Sam, the woman said in a trembling voice and glanced anxiously at Sam. I don't believe it. Tears ran down her cheeks. She stood up confusedly, as if trying to believe it wasn't a dream, and held out her thin hand to him. A shadow of doubt flashed across her face, as if he were a ghost that could disappear at any false move and leave her alone again. Sam could say no more. He grabbed her into his arms and kissed her blonde hair. Happiness. The whole world disappeared for him. You haven't changed. Sam wiped the tears from her face. Helen, I know everything. I found Sandra. She told me everything. I'm so sorry. Helen, our daughter Cynthia is amazing. I know her. I came to get you. You have to come back. The woman's blue eyes filled with tears again. She picked up a white napkin from the table to wipe them away. Sam, her lips trembled. She doesn't remember me anymore. She's a grown-up girl. Why does she need a mother who's been sitting around? I've got nothing to give her. I love her so much, Sam, but I belong here now. I've spent so many years here. And outside the settlement, I'm nothing. My youth is gone. I have no education, no profession, nothing. I'm just a burden on her shoulders. Helen, it's not like that. I have everything. You won't have to work. And Cynthia, she's marvelous. She'll understand. She wants to study art history. Can you believe it? She got in on her own. Cynthia is so much like you. The woman was crying with her face down on her hands on the table. The barmaid made no sign of herself. Apparently, such scenes were not uncommon here. There were no other guests at Terry's cave. It was a difficult conversation. They talked until dark. Sam tried to persuade Helen to go with him, but she wouldn't agree. Then he decided to pull out his trump card and assured her that if she didn't go with him, he would have to move here himself to be near her and tell Cynthia everything. She would then want to come too. The words had an effect on the woman. After much thought, Helen agreed to give it a try after all. Life outside of her familiar place frightened her, but the desire to see her daughter, to see Sandra, who hadn't abandoned her child, was stronger. Helen had asked to wait for Sam at the entrance so she could gather her things, but when she came out, her thin arms were empty. Would she not go after all? But then the man saw his lover carrying a small purse over her shoulder. Helen had said she didn't want to take anything from this life into the new one. Sam liked that idea. Sure, the years were gone, but dragging a heavy load of injustice with him would be too heavy, too, in his opinion. The drive back passed in silence. The couple stared out the train window, taking the years of hardship and torment into the past. Cynthia was struck by the story of her fate. Sandra, Cynthia, and Sam sat next to the girl at the round tea table in Sam's simple living room. Sandra still had an injured leg, but the doctors had already cleared her to go home. She was making a rapid recovery. Even before the hospital conversation with Cynthia, Helen and Sam had visited the woman in the hospital. Cynthia had then been sent to the shopping center in advance to buy something for her mother, which meant that the older generation had time to discuss things amongst themselves. Sandra and Helen cried when they saw each other and hugged each other tightly. When the emotions subsided, the women decided how to tell Cynthia, and most importantly, how they would live their lives from now on. Sam suggested that they all move in with him. He thought it was a great idea. He said he had a big house with plenty of room for everyone. Cynthia would have to reinstate herself at the institute and continue her studies. The women were discouraged by the offer, but after thinking about it, they accepted it. This way Cynthia could spend time with her new parents, and Sandra, who had raised her as her own daughter, would be close by. Sam's life had changed abruptly. Just 6 months ago, he was a lonely man who had no one to take care of but his co-workers. And now he has a family, a daughter, a beloved wife, and a faithful friend. His house was filled with voices and life. It no longer seemed empty and lifeless to him. The women decorated the house with various little things, and it became a real cozy family nest. A marble pedestal with a green velvet cushion had been placed on the place of honor in the living room. Under the glass lay a small item that had changed the entire lives of the occupants of the house. A silver bracelet. Cynthia was able to recover at the institute and was preparing for the upcoming school year. All summer long, they went to exhibitions and theater productions. Sam and Helen couldn't get enough of their child. Sandra was happy that her daughter's life had changed qualitatively. Now she was not worried about her future. Sammy set up the camera on the flight, and when he looked at the footage, he couldn't believe his eyes. Lexi could barely hold back her tears again. Once again, she believed for the umpteenth time that everything would still be okay. But Eleanor and her daughter Stacy, now they would once again make Lexi in front of her father look like a stupidly spoiled girl having a hard time going through adolescence. I knew Lexi was going through a rough patch. Eleanor rolled her eyes mockingly in front of her upset spouse. But what is it? Lexi's going downhill. If you only knew how hard it is for me to keep her in line. It wasn't like that with Stacy. I know you do a lot for Laurel, and I appreciate you for that, his father said with his eyes downcast. He was ashamed of his daughter for her supposedly ugly behavior. And after all, the most frustrating part was that it was useless to explain to him. Lexi had tried many times to convey to her family man that Eleanor was constantly vilifying her. When her father is not at home, her stepmother humiliates her, loads her with endless errands, does not let her study, meet with friends, do her favorite things. But Eleanor is a master at manipulating people and a wonderful actress. In addition, she always manages to turn the father against his daughter. She chooses such words that after them all, Lexi's explanations and arguments seem to the man as pathetic excuses and attempts to slander a holy woman who pulls someone else's difficult child. So now Lexi won't even try to prove to her father that nothing is her fault. It wouldn't get her anywhere. The girl sat on her bed, huddled in the very corner, and tucked her face into a huge teddy bear. Her grandmother's neighbor, Daniel, had given it to her. Lexi was 7 years old at the time. How thrilled she was when she saw her neighbor with the big toy in his hands. He walked into their house, as always, with a big smile on his face. It was the most wonderful time. Would love to go back there. Remembering her grandmother, Lexi smiled. Yes, the girl longed endlessly for a family member who loved her and accepted her completely. Grandma had surrounded Lexi's only granddaughter with warmth and care, talked to her a lot, hugged her often, but she hadn't been there for Lexi for almost 5 years now. Virginia's grandmother died when the girl turned 10. And since then, Lexi's life has changed a lot, and not for the better. But Lexi's childhood was just wonderful. Despite the fact that the girl did not know her own mom, she felt quite happy under her grandmother's wing. Lexi's mom died right after she gave birth to her daughter, her first and only long-awaited child. Some unforeseen complications from childbirth. There was nothing the doctors could do. That's how Sami, Lexi's father, found himself with an infant in his arms. He loved his wife very much and couldn't recover from losing her for a long time. What to do with a newborn baby, Sami had no idea. He was scared to even hold his daughter in his arms. It was good that his mother was there for him. She was the one who took over the girl at that difficult moment. To the great relief of a confused son, completely absorbed in his own grief. At first, the grandmother lived in the orphan family's city apartment. Lexi's mom hadn't had parents for a long time. They died when she was still a student. Sami worked as a ship's mechanic on a fishing boat and often went on voyages. And he wasn't too keen on taking care of a baby. So Lexi was left in her grandmother's care. At first, the grandmother tried to connect with her daughter Sami. She wanted him to take care of the baby on his own. Not that it was hard for Grandma. No, it was just, it's the right thing to do. But the man wouldn't hear of it. He was in grief, and he blamed his daughter for what happened to his beloved wife. Lexi realized it later, when she was older. For a long time, her father thought that it would be better if he and his wife lived without children, traveled, paid all the attention to each other, and were happy. Sami was very much in love with his young, beautiful wife and experienced her loss long and hard. Eventually, Grandma Virginia got tired of being the link between Sami and Lexi. She had long wanted to go to her small homeland in a cozy house under a green roof in the town of New Portland. And she had a lot of things to do there: a vegetable garden, chickens, cats, and a dog. During Grandma's prolonged absence, neighbor Daniel took care of the household. They certainly had a good and warm relationship. Grandma had helped him out more than once, but it was time to do the honors. Convinced that she couldn't get through to her adult son, Grandma packed up little Lexi and went home with her. Sami was only too glad for this turn of events. The infant clearly annoyed him and reminded him of the tragedy with its mere appearance. Besides, the man had to go on a long voyage soon, which also pleased him: waves, socializing with colleagues, hard physical labor. Sami hoped that all this would help him to distract himself from heavy thoughts, in part by the way it did. And the grandmother, with her usual energy, joined in caring for her little granddaughter: diapers, diapering, walks with a stroller. It was as if she felt like a young mother again, only now she enjoyed motherhood with full commitment. When her own son Sami was a baby, the woman did not realize what happiness it is as a child. She had to do a lot of things at once, rebuilding her life in a small village house, finishing her studies at the local college, and working part-time. Those were not easy times. Now the old woman gave all her time, all her attention, all her warmth to Lexi. Looking at the girl, she felt a mixture of pinched tenderness and acute pity. How could such a little girl be left without a mother? And the father didn't seem to want to take care of his daughter. Her son's behavior upset the caring grandmother, but she hoped that she could fix everything. Lexi grew up a sweet and trouble-free child with few illnesses. She did everything on time. She sat up, walked, and talked. Grandma couldn't get enough of her. Lexi grew up surrounded by friendly people, from whom only warmth and acceptance came. First, of course, was Grandma Virginia. She was the most important person to Lexi in general. Reliable, caring, kind, always understanding, always supportive. She opened the world to her granddaughter, talked to her a lot about everything in the world. She explained complicated things to the little girl. Lexi didn't remember that at least once her grandmother waved away her questions. As it usually happens with adults you won't understand yet, "You'll learn when you grow up. Go away. I don't have time for you now." That had never happened between Grandma and Lexi. It was like they understood each other without words. And Grandma also had friends and neighbors, and they too were involved in Lexi's upbringing. The girl went to visit them, made friends with their grandchildren. Sometimes a bunch of children would run from house to house. Somewhere they took turns eating breakfast together, somewhere they ate lunch, somewhere they watched TV together. Someone's father took the whole group to the river or to the woods. It was fun. The girl had a particularly warm relationship with Daniel. His house was across the street from her grandmother's, and the elderly man often came to the neighbor to help her with men's chores, to fix the faucet, fix the roof on the shed, move the closet, and the grandmother fed him tasty pies and treated him to fragrant cutlets. Daniel was a widower. Lexi, hearing that strange word for the first time, frowned thoughtfully, trying to figure out what it meant. Her grandmother explained, of course, there was no one to bake pies for the neighbor. Of course, the man was perfectly capable of cooking and didn't starve, but he never learned the art of baking. Lexi realized later that the neighbor must have had more than just friendly feelings for her grandmother. Why not? He's a widower. The neighbor's husband had been dead for a long time too. But the grandmother must have decided to devote her entire life to her granddaughter with no other distractions. The older woman had big plans for Lexi's future. Grandma Virginia had been involved with Lexi a lot, put her whole soul into her, and thought she would be with her granddaughter for a long time, educate her, marry her off, help her with her great-grandchildren. It didn't work out. Lexi has the fondest memories of her childhood thanks to her grandmother. She especially loved summers, a truly carefree, fun time. Her granddaughters from the city, Karina and Marina, Lexi's best friends, would come to her neighbor Daniel's house for the vacations. She had been looking forward to them all year. The girls stayed together all day long, and the four of them never got bored. But still, they liked to spend time with other village kids, most of all riding bicycles, running to the river and the forest, playing hide and seek and catch up. In the evenings they told scary stories, played soccer barefoot, and crawled home tired but happy. Often the pack of kids slept over at Lexi's grandmother's house. She never said no to her granddaughter if the girl asked for a sleepover. There was plenty of room in the house. The kids chattered and giggled all night, but Grandma didn't reprimand them, realizing how fun and healthy it was. Lexi, of course, realized early on that she didn't live like the other kids. Others had moms, some even had dads. The moms were different, young and old, beautiful and not so beautiful, strict and kind. They were always there for their children. Lexi started asking her grandmother questions early on. She had to tell the girl what had happened. Carefully, gently, the woman told the story of her birth. Lexi didn't know her mom, so she wasn't too upset. Especially the grandmother said that Mommy was now in heaven and was helping her daughter from there. It was like a beautiful fairy tale. But every once in a while, a longing for something special and dear squeezed a child's heart. Lexi sometimes imagined what it would be like to live through this or that moment in life if Mom were there. However, thoughts of her mom didn't bother Lexi much while she lived with her grandmother Virginia in Novaya Petrovka. The girl was warm, cozy, and happy there. Her father, Henry, sometimes appeared at their house, always came to Lexi's birthday party with presents if he was not on a voyage, and at least once every 2 months he visited his own. To Lexi, he was familiar and dear, but practically a stranger. A handsome young man with sad gray eyes, always trim, nicely dressed. He would show up with gifts, beautiful dolls, smart dresses, interesting books. Lexi wondered how he always managed to guess so accurately what she was dreaming of. Could he really read her mind? Later, the girl realized that it was her grandmother Virginia who told her son what to buy for her granddaughter in the city. Henry usually came for a couple of days, less often for a week or two. He didn't know what to talk to his daughter about. He asked the usual questions about school, friends, and hobbies. Lexi could see that he wasn't really interested, not like his neighbor, Daniel, who loved to hear stories about the adventures of country kids. He laughed, recalled episodes from his childhood, and unobtrusively gave important advice. The elderly neighbor was just a wonderful listener. Her father, on the other hand, only asked because he had to. Lexi understood this even as a child. The girl really wanted to please her father, to interest him in something, to please him. But all her attempts were defeated by his indifference. Henry diligently fulfilled his paternal duties, transferred money to her mother, bought necessary things for the house. When he came to visit, he did the garden and repairs. But he did it out of a sense of duty. Soul affection between him and his daughter never appeared. Grandmother Virginia tried to bring up her son, explained to him how to behave with the girl. The adults thought Lexi was asleep, but she heard everything. A girl needs her father's attention, the mother half explained to her son. She's growing up, maturing. Come visit more often. Take her or fly together on vacation, Grandma Virginia said. Show her New York, Los Angeles, vacation by the sea. You know I work a lot, Mom Henry answered. I'm always on voyages, making money. By the way, I need to save up for Lexi's future. I often forget about the present. Grandma sighed sadly. Don't forget. No, I see how well you're doing. Lexi is happy with you. What can I give her? I'm still a little confused myself. Lexi, even though she was just a little girl, realized that she was burdening her father with her very existence. No, he won't take her on vacation or visit her more often. Her father was better off on his own, without her and her grandmother, in his incomprehensible, lonely life. That was a shame. Lexi loved her only parent very much, but realizing that your father didn't need you was scary and unpleasant. The girl even cried a little into her pillow, but in the morning she acted as if nothing had happened. And then the father left, hugging his daughter goodbye. I'm going on a long voyage, he warned. I won't see you for a long time. I won't be able to come to you on September 1st. Sorry. That's okay, the girl waved her hand nonchalantly. She was not accustomed that her father was absent in the most important moments of her life. So what? But her grandmother was always there for her. Lexi remembered the summer before first grade well because she had a birthday party in August where an important event took place. As always, Grandma set 2 tables in the garden, one for the children and one for the adults. She made her granddaughter's birthdays crowded, cheerful, colorful. The woman herself took great pleasure in socializing with good people. It was a celebration Lexi and her grandmother had been looking forward to all year. Daniel showed up a little later than the other guests and gave Lexi a huge teddy bear that his granddaughters Clara and Maggie had helped him pick out. Lexi marveled when she saw the teddy bear. She had never had such huge toys before. Happy birthday. Clara and Maggie rushed over to hug the birthday girl. Thank you. Lexi clapped her hands. What's Daniel still holding? I found a guitar in the attic the other day. I was sorting it out. I thought I'd throw it away, Daniel said. And I came across this instrument. Daniel, and I forgot that you are a musician, rejoiced Grandmother Virginia. Since when haven't you played? Probably since my wife died and I haven't picked up a guitar. Yes, about 15 years have passed, nodded the neighbor. In his eyes flashed sadness. I forgot about the guitar, and then suddenly I found it and remembered it. Play us something, asked one of the guests. Play. The children chimed in. Clara and Maggie stood proudly beside their grandfather. Sure enough, Daniel had suddenly become the star of the party. Everybody's looking at him and asking for him. Well, what do you want to play? A ditty or something? The man asked. Everyone murmured approvingly. Then Daniel grabbed the guitar, struck the strings with his fingers, and the magic began. Melodic sounds filled the garden. Lexi stared at her neighbor with her mouth open and wondered, how does he do it? Where does this beautiful melody come from? The guests fell silent, looking at Daniel. Well, what are you singing? Come on. Who's first? Who's the bravest? The mother of a neighbor boy, one of Lexi's friends, started a ditty in a thick bass. She sang something about a millionaire who's like a calf. The adults laughed, but Lexi didn't get the point of the ditty. She listened to the melody. The guests were getting into the swing of things. They ordered more and more songs for Daniel, and he, strangely enough, knew them all. Well, if he didn't know them, he was quick to pick out the right tunes. The adults sang in unison. It was so wonderful, so funny, so beautiful. The children came out from behind the table and started a game of hide and seek. Of course, they called Lexi to come with them, but she couldn't tear herself away. She kept sitting next to Daniel, listening, and then suddenly she started singing along with the adults. She quickly learned the words of the song about the wounded soldier. It was probably the third time the guests sang it. Ashley's mom was the first to notice. Listen, can you hear her singing? The guests fell silent. Lexi did too. She was embarrassed to sing. One woman, Ashley's mom, realized this and belted out the song with her. It was easier for Lexi that way. When the chords died down, there was a round of applause. Good job. You sing well, the adults praised Lexi. Not just good, Grandma Virginia shook her head. The girl has talent. As an employee of our cultural center, I say, Virginia, why did you hide such a treasure from us for so many years? I didn't know it myself, smiled the proud grandmother. Since then, Daniel had become an even more frequent guest in the house of his grandmother and granddaughter. Lexi herself was always running to him. The man taught the girl a lot of children's funny songs. Now she constantly hummed them everywhere at home, in the vegetable garden, even on the way to the store. Why didn't Lexi realize before how great it was to sing? She didn't go to daycare because it was too far to drive her. Grandma didn't work anyway, so her granddaughter grew up with her. At daycare, of course, a music teacher would have noticed Lexi's talent sooner. At home, they had almost no music. Grandma usually had audiobooks on, not songs. So it wasn't until Lexi was 7 years old that she realized she incredibly enjoyed singing and music. School will start. We'll send you to the cultural center, her grandmother and mother said. She says they have a good choir there. They even invite them to other cities for performances. Will you sing there? You can't bury such talent in the ground. Lexi listened to her grandmother and looked forward to September. Lexi wanted to be on stage with people who shared her passion. The future seemed bright and fabulous. And the girl also asked Daniel to teach her to play the guitar. He refused at first. It's too early for you. Your fingers are small, your hands are weak. You can't hold such a big thing. But the neighbor was wrong. Lexi was able to play the right chords the first time. See, Grandpa, she can do it. Are you going to teach her? Clara and Ashley asked. Of course I will. Daniel scratched the back of his head in puzzlement. What are you going to do now? The neighbor kept his promise. Every day he taught little Lexi chords and everything he knew. The student was making great progress. Not only was she picking up everything on the fly, she was also learning how to pick out melodies. Of course, I don't know much about it. Daniel shared his observations with his grandmother, Virginia, but she seems to have an exceptional ear. She should go to music school. I wish she could, sighed Grandma, but we don't have it in Petrovka. There's only a choir here. Do you go to town often? Every day. At least she'll be in the choir. Anna promised. Although her granddaughter is still young, older kids sing there. And then came the long-awaited September 1st. Lexi still remembered how her grandmother proudly led her through the village streets by the hand to the school ceremony. The girl was a little nervous, but it was a joyful excitement. She and her grandmother carefully prepared for the festive day. The day before they went to the city, where they chose the most beautiful things for a long time: lacquered shoes, a smart white blouse, a lush dark skirt. In the morning, Grandma braided Lexi's hair into tight braids, which she decorated with big white bows. She slipped a beautiful bouquet of gladioli into her granddaughter's hands. Lexi still remembered their delicious scent. Passers-by smiled. Grandmothers with dressed-up granddaughters congratulated both of them on the beginning of their school journey, wishing the girl only A's. Lexi thanked people. She knew there would be a celebration tonight. Her grandmother had already invited the neighborhood kids to visit and made the dough for her signature pies from the evening. Lexi waited for classes to start at the House of Culture. She was so excited to sing on stage. "Lexi, the teacher will really like you," her mom assured her. And so she did. Peter appreciated the new student's abilities. However, he didn't let her down, despite her age. If the girl did not hit the notes or confused words, strictly reprimanded. But those were minor things. The main thing was that Lexi felt in her element. Grandmother Virginia worried that modest granddaughter is lost in front of the audience. But no, the little singer behaved on stage like a fish in water. First, Lexi was in the choir, and then began to perform solo. That kind of gift is rare. A real unlimited diamond. She should be in good hands. What do we have? It's just a country club, Peter told his grandmother when she came to pick up her granddaughter. Lexi didn't give up her guitar lessons either. It had become a daily necessity for her. The girl had long ago surpassed her neighbor teacher, Daniel, but she still went to see him every day. First of all, he had a guitar. Second, the neighbor could always give valuable advice about playing. Third, no one Lexi knew more about music than Daniel. He praised on a case-by-case basis, noticing subtleties. He sincerely admired his little neighbor's success. Later, living with her father, Lexi learned the expression soulmate. She and Daniel were probably just that, soulmates. The neighbor replaced the grandfather Lexi had never known, and maybe even, at some points, the father. As time went on, Lexi grew up. She did well in school, performed with the choir, and continued to learn to play the guitar. On her next birthday, her father gave his daughter an instrument of her own. Of course, the idea of the gift was suggested to him by her grandmother. The girl had everything she needed for happiness: a caring grandmother, near understanding, kind neighbors, faithful friends. Lexi felt loved and native. In Oliver Ranges, she was her own and did not even think about moving to her father in the city someday. What would there be to do there? Gray concrete boxes instead of houses, crowds of people rushing somewhere who don't even look at each other. And my father was dear to me, but completely unfamiliar and distant. People around her often said that there were more prospects in the city, that it would be much more interesting for the girl to grow up there. But Lexi felt quite happy and satisfied with her life. Her childhood had been warm, sunny, and cozy. Until that fateful day in February when, for some reason, Daniel had come to school to pick her up. Lexi had been going to school and coming home alone for a long time. Her grandmother, Kira, had accompanied her at first, but since second grade, Lexi had become quite independent. It was not a long way, but the time flew by in the company of her friends and neighbors. The girls were walking and talking about everything, laughing, discussing the details of the school day, making plans. And then suddenly there was a knock at the door during a literature lesson. A quiet conversation between the teacher and someone who had not crossed the threshold. And then Mrs. Ellen's worried eyes and her quiet request. "Lexi, get ready, your neighbor is here to pick you up." Lexi felt the stares of everyone in the class fixed on her. That was how unusual this was. When Lexi saw Daniel, she immediately knew something terrible had happened. The dull look in her eyes, the gray color of his face. The always calm man's hands trembled slightly. Grandma Lexi immediately guessed. An icy hand squeezed her heart. Anxiety. In that instant, the girl realized that Grandma was the whole world to her. The man nodded silently. "What's wrong with her?" "She's not well." "They took her to the hospital," he said. Daniel told the girl only at home that her grandmother was gone. The woman suddenly felt sick. Her heart was racing. She sat down on a bench. She thought she'd waited out at home. That's how she was caught by a neighbor who came to borrow some eggs. They immediately called an ambulance, but the doctors who arrived could only pronounce her dead. So Lexi was left alone in the world. That night she was taken in by her neighbor Kira. She and her grandmother were close friends. In the company of a kind-hearted woman and her grandchildren, Lexi was not so dreary, as if she was alone at home. But the girl was still in some incomprehensible state. Everything that was happening seemed unreal to her. This simply could not happen. How there is no grandmother. And what? She will never be again. Never at all. Dad was on a trip. He was informed, of course, but it took time to get to the mainland. The man didn't even make it to the funeral organized by his neighbors. During those terrible days, Lexi somehow didn't think about her future. She cried a lot, often talking to the neighbors about her grandmother. They knew and loved her and said nice things about her. This made the girl feel a little better. And then her father arrived, awkwardly hugged his daughter, and said the words that made Lexi cringe in pain once again. "Well, daughter, we'll live together in the city now." How in the city? Why the city? Lexi didn't want to leave Oliver Ranges at all. Grandma's gone, of course, and she never will be. But here is school, here are friends, here are neighbors, here is choir. After all, here is Daniel, who will always support and comfort. Here's Kira, Stacy and her mom Laurel. What's out there? A cold, alien father who knows nothing at all about me. Yeah, he's a stranger to me, for that matter. "I'm not going with you," Lexi said firmly, pulling away from her parent. "I'm not going to the city." The man looked at his daughter and flapped his eyes confusedly. He didn't know what to say to her in response. The neighbors came to the rescue. Very carefully and gently, they conveyed to Lexi the idea that there was no other way out. The neighbors hugged the girl, saying that they too would miss her very much. There were tears in the eyes of these people, women and men, grandmothers and grandfathers. They all gave Lexi their phone numbers and assured her that they would always welcome her calls. Lexi was crying too. It was hard for her to part with Oliver Ranges, but the sensitive adults managed to convince the girl that she had to do it, otherwise there was no other way. "You come to visit," Daniel said, "for the vacations with a small basket. Will you live with me? What do I care if you have 2 girls or 3? You guys have more fun." Lexi knew it wasn't a polite invitation. Daniel was really looking forward to her vacation, and that made her feel at least a little warmer and brighter. So Lexi went into town. It wasn't the first time the girl had found herself in her father's apartment. She and her grandmother Kira sometimes came to visit him. Lexi even had her own room here, a bed, a large separate closet, a desk, everything a child needed. Truth be told, the girl never liked this place. Much more, she loved her bedroom at her grandmother's house. There were a lot of cozy and important things: plush toys, interesting books, an aquarium with colorful fish. But there was no way out. She had to get settled in a new place. The first thing Lexi did was to put on the bed the same teddy bear that Daniel had given her the summer before first grade. It made her feel cozy. The toy reminded her of those happy and carefree times when her grandmother was around. Lexi's life had completely turned around. There was a lot to get used to: a new room, a new school, new faces, unfamiliar surroundings, other rules. A father constantly immersed in his own thoughts. He'd moved to a new position that didn't involve months of traveling. He had to be with his daughter all the time, and he was indeed there all the time, but only physically. Justin's thoughts were clearly far away. Lexi could see that her father missed the sea, his colleagues, his friends, his old job. And he often complained to acquaintances about the fact that now he gets much less money. "I'm not used to living like this," counting pennies to paychecks, Justin told one of his former colleagues over the phone. "Here, on the big land, you can't earn as much as at sea." Justin tried very hard to be a good father. In the mornings, he made his daughter breakfast. In the evening, he made sure to ask Lexi how her day was going. In the evening, he never forgot to check in with Lexi about her day. Lexi could see that he wasn't interested in what she thought of her teacher or what her classmates had said to her. Justin bought the girl everything she needed: clothes, groceries, school supplies, toys. He even enrolled her in music school. "You used to play guitar a lot at Oliver Ranges. Why don't you pick it up anymore?" Lexi sighed. Yes, indeed. Since Grandma Kira had passed away, she hadn't played anything once, simply because she wasn't in the mood. There was so much on her mind. There was some kind of constant chaos in her mind and soul. By the end of the day, the girl was so tired of her own thoughts, impressions, and emotions that she fell asleep like a hamstring. Did she care about the guitar? But her father's words made Lexi remember about her favorite instrument. The girl took the guitar, ran her fingers over the strings, and she immediately felt better. It was like a warmth from the past. And why had she never guessed that music would soothe her? "Do you want to go to music school?" Dad suggested it. Lexi thought about it and agreed. From an early age, she had heard from those around her that that was where she should go. That in their small village, such a talent could not be fully revealed. That Lexi needed competent teachers from the city. And here it is, the opportunity everyone's been talking about. It took a lot of effort for the father to get his daughter enrolled. First of all, the school year was coming to an end. Secondly, the school teachers were not satisfied with the age of the student. The girl was 10, and the music school accepted 6 or 7-year-olds. But Justin managed to insist on his own. And so, just a couple days after their conversation, Lexi started attending the new school. The school was large, bright, and not at all like Oliver Ranges, whose interiors hadn't changed since the Soviet Union. Everything was different here. At first, Lexi was even afraid of the new teachers. They looked too strict and aloof. But when the study began, the girl realized that she got exactly where she needed to go. So much new knowledge, so many subtleties. Lexi absorbed musical literacy like a sponge and, of course, made great progress. Very soon, teachers began to praise the diligent, talented student. It was very pleasant. The girl gradually settled in the city. She had new friends and girlfriends. True, such warm and almost kinship relations, as in Oliver Ranges, with the guys with no one has not formed. But it wasn't customary to have such close friendships here, and what they did have was great. Lexi and her classmates went to movies and skating rinks, to pizza parlors and entertainment centers. Sometimes they would just walk around the park. Sometimes they would go to someone's house. The birthdays of local children were not like in the village. They were not hearty gatherings of children and adults, but trips to a bowling alley or a trampoline center. Children were entertained by special people dressed in the costumes of cartoon characters, animators. Interesting, of course, even fun in some places. But every time Lexi remembered her own heartfelt birthdays, full of sincere hugs. They were organized for her granddaughter by her loving grandmother, Kira. How Lexi missed and longed for her. It was not the first great loss in her life, but the girl didn't know her mom, wasn't used to her, and therefore wasn't too worried about her absence. Grandmother was a different matter. With her father, Justin, relations were polite, even, but some strained, clumsy even. He tried to be involved as a parent, but it didn't work. He wasn't interested in his daughter's thoughts and experiences. He didn't understand her at all. Lexi didn't feel even a fraction of the love and warmth that Grandma Kira gave her, and it was very hard. The girl was literally freezing. It was good that she had music in her life. Lexi saved herself by picking up a guitar and dissolving into melodic sounds. She would play whatever the teachers assigned. She also picked up songs she liked or composed something of her own. With the help of sounds, the girl used to express her emotions, her longing for her grandmother and her former life, her anxiety, her desire to be closer to her father, her only relative now. Music relaxed, soothed, helped her feel more confident. As time passed, the small family's life was gradually getting better. Justin was surprised to discover that his daughter could cook. It was unexpected. The children of his acquaintances of that age could not hold a knife and were considered almost babies. Lexi, on the other hand, was adept with all kitchen tools, and at her young age baked mind-boggling pies and made flavorful borscht. When the girl first made her and her father a delicious dinner from the leftovers found in the refrigerator, the man was stunned. Returning from work, he even at the entrance to the entrance caught the aroma, from which he began to salivate profusely. But Justin couldn't imagine that those odors were coming from his apartment. "What are you, all of you?" he marveled as he entered the apartment. "Or did someone come to see us?" "It's me," Lexi smiled. She liked the look of amazement on her parents' face. "My grandmother taught me." Grandma Kira had indeed taught her granddaughter the art of cooking from a young age. As a little girl, Lexi had helped her knead dough, and when she got a little older, the girl learned to wield a knife like a skilled hostess. She even liked cooking. It was almost like music, a real art. Now Lexi often cooked for their little family, and she did it with great pleasure. She loved to see how eagerly her father devoured her culinary masterpieces. Somehow, the relationship between the daughter and her father gradually improved. Yes, the adaptation was not easy and very long. Both had to work hard, but in the end Lexi got what she wanted, the warmth and care of her favorite native man. It didn't happen all at once, not all of a sudden. She won back her father's heart little by little. A crust of ice was binding it. At first it gave cracks, and then it slowly fell away, crumbled away. One day Justin found it interesting to talk to his daughter. She had become all grown up, sensible and life-rich, full of events and impressions. The father now looked at his daughter in a completely different way. Lexi could feel it and was glad for the change. Her father was no longer withdrawn when he came home from work. No, Justin now shared both his future plans and news from work with his daughter. Father and daughter went on several vacations, as Grandma Kira had once requested. Justin showed Lexi the big cities of Russia: St. Petersburg, Moscow, Samara, Kazan. The girl marveled and marveled, looking around, and Justin genuinely enjoyed her reaction. They were such wonderful trips. Lexi found out that her father was a very intelligent and erudite man. He was knowledgeable in a wide variety of fields: architecture, history, archaeology, culture. And he enjoyed sharing that knowledge with his daughter. The first summer after Kira's grandmother passed away, Lexi and her father came to Novopetrovka. The man prepared the house for the long absence of the owners, closed the windows with shutters, wrapped the furniture with polyethylene, threw out junk from the attic and from the basement. And Justin also found a real treasure: puffy albums with photos that his grandmother had so carefully kept. Here was the entire family history, from Grandma and Grandpa's ancestors to Lexi. This archive was what my father took home to the city apartment. Getting the house ready only took a couple days. During that time, Lexi felt as if she had traveled back in time. Familiar places, smiling neighbors, old friends who missed her so much. When her father told the girl it was time to go back, Lexi even had tears in her eyes. "What do you mean, go back? We've only been here for a little while," she said. "But I have to go to work, and I'm done." "Why do we have to stay?" asked the father, who had not yet gotten to know his daughter well enough. He could not understand the girl's worries. But Daniel, of course, had guessed it all at once. "Let her stay with me for a couple weeks," the older man said to Justin. "My granddaughters are here. The three of them have been friends since birth. They'll miss each other. Let them go to the river, run in the woods, breathe fresh air. They'll be happy. Everything is better than girls all day long in a stuffy apartment, while you're at work. It's weird, Justin said uncertainly. You, Uncle Dan, are like nobody to her. What do you mean, nobody? The old man was indignant. She's like a third granddaughter to me. I've known her ever since. Lexi's heart was warmed by the elderly neighbor's words. She looked at her father pleadingly. To spend at least a few weeks in her beloved Novopetrovka in the company of her best friends was happiness. Her father agreed, and Lexi was jumping for joy, and Clara and Maggie jumped with her. It was a wonderful time. Everything was the same as always: late-night games with friends, familiar places, neighbors who have known you since you were born. Except that Kira's grandmother wasn't around, and her house looked out onto the road with boarded-up shutters. Sadness periodically clutched the girl's heart. The people around her sensitively picked up on these mood swings and tried to support her. They made it easier for the girl. And then the father came to pick up his daughter, and it was over. Lexi cried as she left for the city. Her friends and girlfriends hugged her. Daniel stroked the girl's head. It's okay, it's okay. Don't be so upset. You're not leaving forever. When you have your fall vacation, your father will bring you here to rest. You are welcome here. Lexi understood that the elderly neighbor says it not for the sake of a red word. She was always welcome in Novopetrovka. Realizing this simple truth made her feel better and warmer. But Lexi never came to Novopetrovka for vacation again. Shortly after she left, Daniel, hospitalized with a stroke. He recovered, but he could no longer live alone in the village. Daniel was taken in by his daughter, Clara, and Maggie's mother. The family lived in another town, so Lexi never saw her childhood friends or her kind neighbor again. Another stroke of fate. Be that as it may, the girl did get used to the new reality. Relations with her father became more cordial and warm. The household had settled down, life wasn't bad. At least there was always a native person near Lexi, ready to support and listen. And the girl appreciated it. But her father kept talking about going back to sea. You know, it's my thing. Waves, wind, sea air, and space. Nothing for miles around. It's breathtaking, he said. Lexi understood. She knew exactly what it was like to get her heart racing at the sight of her favorite scenery. And we don't have enough money, Sami lamented. Those who go on voyages get paid a lot more. It's a different kind of pay here on land. Lexi didn't think they were in need. They had all the basic necessities, even more. They dressed well, ate well, traveled. But her father still dreamed of more and often remembered his former earnings. Well, I'm an adult, Lexi once said reasonably. I'm 13. I've been going to school by myself for a long time. I've been cooking since I was a kid. Why don't you come back? I can see how much you miss the sea. I'll be fine on my own. No, you're just a child. You can't be left alone for so long. I don't know what will happen, answered my father. What could happen? Sincerely perplexed the girl. She felt independent enough to live a month or two alone. Yes, it will be boring without Daddy, of course, but she will manage. According to the law, you can't be left alone. You're only 13, said the father. The neighbors will find out. They'll call the guardianship office. Yes, the neighbors here are strange, not like in Novopetrovka. I agree, Lexi nodded. How do you feel about having a house helper? Au pair. What am I, Stacy? The girl said indignantly. Well, if I go on a voyage, you need someone to look after you. It won't be a babysitter, but more like a housekeeper. You're au pair. I don't need an au pair, Lexi mumbled. But she already knew her father wouldn't back down. That's not the way it works. Fine, hire your own housekeeper, she said. Father decided to return to the sea, immediately perked up. Now he smiled and joked a lot. Sami looked like a perfectly happy man. Lexi was happy looking at her parent. But she was also a little worried. What if she didn't get along with this woman who was supposed to be looking after her in the house? What if it turns out to be some nasty aunt? The search for a housekeeper was not going well. Father contacted many agencies and himself on the ads called, but came across only babysitters for children, retired women, or students, ready to spend a few hours a day with a small child for a fee. But no one agreed to live with a teenager and look after the apartment. However, I have not given up hope of finding such a person, he optimistically declared to his daughter after another failure. One day, Sammy returned from a friend's birthday party in high spirits. It was late in the evening. Lexi was sitting over a difficult math homework assignment. "It's all taken care of," her father happily told her. "I found you a housekeeper. It's the best thing that could happen to you." Lexi was a little tense. After all, this was about her destiny. "Could you be more specific?" asked the girl. And the father told his daughter the story of this fateful, as it would later turn out, meeting. Here is the edited text with the replacement of names. Sammy came to his buddy Jake's birthday party. They had once graduated from university together, then even worked on the same ship. Later, the old friends' paths had diverged, but there was still a warm buddy relationship between them. It was Jake's anniversary. On this occasion, the man decided to roll a big celebration in a restaurant. Among the guests were many people Sammy had seen for the first time, including Grace, an acquaintance of Jake's wife. The tall, slender woman looked beautiful, stylishly and tastefully dressed, smiling, friendly. At some point, Grace and Sammy got to talking. Both had already had a few drinks and were relaxed. The evening moved into the revelation phase. It was time for some fascinating and candid life stories. It turned out that Grace had recently divorced her husband. Or rather, according to the woman, her husband simply put her and her daughter Emma on the street because of a silly quarrel. How could that man do that to his child? Sammy was outraged. "I have Emma," not his daughter, Grace sighed. "This is my child from my first marriage. My spouse, now ex, never could accept another man's daughter. He never loved her." Grace found herself in a desperate situation. The money for renting a house was woefully inadequate. The woman could not find a good job as she had no education and experience. She devoted herself to her husband and daughter. She looked after the house, cooked delicious meals, organized everyday life. And he, a successful businessman, provided the family with money. Grace felt happy, protected, but without realizing it, was in a very vulnerable position, completely financially dependent on her husband. "And now I'm all alone in this predicament, grasping for any part-time job to feed myself," and Emma, Grace complained. "My parents are long gone. I have nowhere to wait for help. A friend invited me to a party, said I needed some distraction. And I'm still thinking about my own problems all the time." "Yeah, I thought I was in a hopeless situation," Sammy stretched out. "You're certainly having a much harder time," Sammy said sympathetically. "I hope things work out for you in the end. I, for one, will try to help you with your job. We're kind of looking for a secretary at our company." Grace missed the potential job offer, but caught on to the words "desperate situation." And Sammy told this sensitive, beautiful woman about everything: about the death of his beloved wife during childbirth, about his daughter Lexi, about the mother who raised the girl until she was 10 years old, about the difficulties of adapting to his own child when suddenly Lexi was left without the care of a loving grandmother. But alas, he has to go to sea all the time because of work. And for his daughter needs a nanny or a au pair. However, no one agrees. People offer hourly babysitting services for babies, but no one wants to live with a teenager and keep an eye on the house, Sammy complained. Grace's eyes lit up at this admission from the man. "Really, don't you realize that our meeting today was no accident?" the woman exclaimed. "It is a miracle of some kind. Providence has brought us together." Much later, it turns out that it was not Providence that brought Sammy and Grace together. Jake's wife was aware of her husband's friend's situation and she wanted to help her friend in distress. The women had purposely arranged for Grace and Sami to meet at the party, thinking it was a wonderful outlet for both the woman and the single man. "How old is your child?" Grace clarified. 13. "And your daughter Emma is 15, if I heard correctly." "Yes, Emma is 15. I know how to raise teenage girls. I know how to approach them. I love to talk to them. We'll definitely make a relationship work." Sami thought about it. He needed a housekeeper. That was true. But he was counting on a professional employee of a specialized agency. And here was Grace. And with a teenage daughter. But on the other hand, he was pressed for time. He had to leave soon, and the problem wasn't solved yet. "Your little girl is about to go through puberty. It's a very dangerous period," Grace warned. "I know, Emma's already been through it. At that age, children need special supervision, or they'll be in trouble." Eleanor sounded convincing, and she looked confident. Sami thought about it. Indeed, this woman had a lot of experience with children. Her daughter Stacy was a little older than Lexi, after all. The girls would have a lot of fun together. They'd definitely find a common language. Plus, Eleanor was a real beauty. Sami liked her company. She had a great disposition. After some thought, the man agreed. "I think it's a great option." He smiled at Eleanor, whom he liked more and more. A strong woman, unbroken by the blows of fate. She radiated goodwill. Pleasant, intelligent, sensitive. Yes, exactly the kind of person Sami would want Lexi to be around. Eleanor and her daughter Stacy moved into Sami and Lexi's apartment. The man put them in the living room. There was plenty of room. Both Eleanor and Stacy seemed like nice and kind individuals to Lexi at first. "Wow, your hair is so cool." Stacy marveled when she saw the girl. "Can I try to braid it for you?" Lexi shrugged. She was never much into hair, just a neat ponytail before school. That was it. But Stacy had put a stylish braid hairstyle on Lexi's head, which suited her incredibly well. Lexi admired her reflection in the mirror. "You look beautiful," Stacy smiled. "You're pretty too, Lexi." And it was the plain truth. Both Stacy and her mother were real beauties. Tall, slender, with big eyes that always attracted attention. They were the kind of women men would always look at. And both Stacy and Eleanor knew how to emphasize the advantages of their appearance. They chose successful outfits, skillfully applied makeup, made beautiful, stylish hairstyles. Lexi had seen it as magic at first. In her and her father's house, there were never any cosmetics or closets full of clothes. The girl watched Eleanor's movements, mesmerized as she applied her makeup in front of the mirror. "Interesting." The woman smiled, noticing the girl's curious look. "Sit next to me. I'll show you how it's done." And in half an hour, Eleanor made Lexi a completely different person. In the mirror, the girl saw not herself, but a beautiful girl, like a heroine from a fairy tale, with a delicate blush on her cheeks and plump, dull lips. Splendid. Eleanor marveled. Always walk like that. But Lexi couldn't look like this all the time. Yes, it was beautiful, but she didn't like the feeling of makeup on her face. And it was a waste of time first to apply makeup, then to wash it off. It could take an hour to do it all. Eleanor and Stacy gave Lexi what she lacked: so much female attention. They went shopping together, picked out outfits, talked about movies and celebrities. Before school, Lexi now always dressed Stacy up, doing her wonderful, stylish and comfortable hairstyles. Eleanor and Stacy also helped the girl with her closet. "Your clothes are kind of, gray." "They're gray," Eleanor said, inspecting Lexi's closet. "They don't let you wear anything else at school," the girl said. She hadn't thought about it before. It was silly. You could always find something that would fit the regulations and fit nicely. "Stacy, I think we should go shopping. Are you coming? You have amazing taste." We're going to need your advice." Of course I'm in. I love shopping. Eleanor and Stacy had indeed picked out clothes that made Lexi look like a princess: tight lace blouses, slightly shorter skirts, heeled shoes. "Well, that's different." Eleanor was pleased, looking at her mentee. "You have a wonderful figure. You are slender, long-legged. Why hide it all under shapeless hoodies?" Lexi had never gotten so many compliments at school before. For the first time in her life, she felt not just smart, but truly beautiful. And it was wonderful. Stacy had become Lexi's true older friend, almost the sister she had always dreamed of having. Being older, Stacy would tell Lexi about her relationships with boyfriends and girlfriends. It was so exciting that the girl even forgot to breathe, as if she were watching a TV show. Stacy was a great storyteller. Her speech flowed smoothly and measuredly, and Lexi's eyes were filled with vivid pictures of this beautiful girl's life. Lexi admired Stacy. "Secrets again?" Eleanor peeked into their room. "Going to watch movies already? Did you get the pizza?" Those were wonderful days. Lexi felt like she was part of a sophisticated woman's world. Her father loved her, but he couldn't give her all that girly companionship. It turned out Lexi really needed it, though she hadn't realized it before. When Eleanor learned that Lexi could cook well, she was thrilled. Wow. The women marveled when they saw the girl taking a tray of pies out of the oven. "Did you make these yourself?" "Yes," Lexi answered, not without pride. "My grandmother taught me. I've been doing this for a long time." Lexi was tired of ordering food from restaurants, so she decided to treat Eleanor and Stacy to homemade pies. "This is divine," Stacy praised, taking a big bite of pie. "I've never tasted anything like it, but it's bad for your figure, of course. At your age, is that okay?" "You won't believe it, and I still haven't learned how to bake," Eleanor smiled. "And you, Lexi, surprise me. You're so young, and you're already so good." Lexi blossomed from these compliments. Now, to please Eleanor and Stacy, the girl tried to cook something every day. She was actually much better at it than Eleanor. Her soups were often too runny and salty, and her casseroles were burnt on top but still raw inside. So Eleanor preferred to order takeout. Lexi had no trouble making dinner or lunch for three, and she was happy to do it. After all, Stacy and Eleanor had taken such good care of her, taught her so much. And then her father came back. Eleanor and Stacy moved back into their rented apartment, and Lexi was very upset about it. She missed their heart-to-heart talks, going to coffee shops and shopping. Lexi missed Eleanor and Stacy, who had opened up a whole other side of life for her that she hadn't even known existed before. When her father returned, he asked his daughter how she had been during his absence. Lexi described Eleanor and Stacy in the most vivid colors. "They're so great. You can't imagine. They're so interesting, so good," she shared with her father. He only smiled, seeing that he was satisfied with his daughter's stories. A month later, Michael was sent on another trip, this time for a longer period of time. Once again, Eleanor and her daughter came to look after Lexi. The time flew by. When her father returned, they didn't leave, but stayed in the apartment, which Lexi was incredibly happy about. The girl noticed, of course, that her father looked at Eleanor in a special way. And the woman herself, though she tried to hide it, clearly sympathized with her employer. But Lexi thought she was just imagining what she wanted. Turns out she wasn't. It was a long time coming. "I had no doubt it would happen," Stacy said as Lexi shared her impressions with her. "I just got the timing a little wrong. But okay, I'm so careful, so experienced. I've got a good eye." After the next flight, Michael and Eleanor got married. They didn't have a big wedding, just 4 of them at a restaurant. Lexi was over the moon. This beautiful, kind woman had joined their family. She would now live with them, giving Lexi the feminine attention she so desperately needed. That's great. The girl had dreamed of something like this for a long time, but everything turned out much better than she could have imagined. Not only did she have Eleanor, but also Stacy, practically an older sister, a friend who knew so many interesting things. Everything had changed as soon as Michael left on his voyage. The stamp and the passport radically transformed Eleanor's attitude to her stepdaughter. Lexi expected from her stepmother and stepsister the same behavior, care, heartfelt conversations, joint walks. But all of that had abruptly stopped. Eleanor went to her friends and beauty parlors. Stacy, too, was living her own life, friends, admirers, nightclubs. And Lexi? She was all alone. Alone again. She'd been abruptly ignored. The only thing she was praised for was cooking and cleaning. Lexi single-handedly cleaned the entire apartment and cooked mind-blowing lunches and dinners just to earn Eleanor's approval. She didn't realize what was going on. Her stepmother praised the girl discreetly and ordered new dishes the next day. Sometimes Eleanor also asked Lexi to mop the floors. That was all the communication. Lexi felt confused and deceived Stacy. "Tell me, how did you guys hang out at the club?" One day, the girl asked her stepsister a question. She looked at Lexi absent-mindedly and said nothing. When the girl repeated the question, Stacy sighed heavily. "How clingy are you? You're so clingy. You're impossible to be around." It was a blow to Lexi. She thought she and Stacy were friends. The girl used to share the details of her life with her. They talked a lot, went for walks together. Stacy had given Lexi invaluable advice on makeup and matching clothes. And now this. More to come. Eleanor had gotten the hang of it. Lexi was now in charge of the entire household. Stepmother, in the absence of her husband, practically did not cook. It became the stepdaughter's duty, as well as cleaning. If earlier the girl was at least praised for helping around the house, now she received only remarks and reproaches if she did not have time to do something. And it was not easy. Lexi had studies and music school. Of course, the girl's grades got worse. It is impossible to do everything at home and study well at the same time. "I'm tired. I don't have time to study," Lexi tried to explain to Eleanor. "This is the second time I've skipped music." "At least let Stacy cook and clean once in a while," Lexi said. "That, my dear, is called laziness." Eleanor looked at her stepdaughter indifferently. "Nothing supernatural is required of you. Didn't you know that people who live together share household chores equally?" Equal was too far from the truth. There was no such thing as equal sharing. Stacy lived her life to the fullest, going out with friends, going on dates, shopping, and going to beauty salons. Sometimes the underage Stacy didn't even spend the night at home. Eleanor called her every now and then, and sometimes even drove out at night to pick up her wayward daughter. Only her father, Sammy, knew nothing about this side of Stacy's life. In front of him, the girl behaved impeccably. Stacy did absolutely nothing around the house. Even Lexi had to make her bed. "Stacy is studying for her final exams," Eleanor said in response to Lexi's fair comment. At first, the girl still tried to object. "But you have 2 years to go to college, and she's about to." However, Lexi had never seen Stacy with a textbook. She was reluctant to go to school because she had a lot of problems with her studies. She was only interested in dating and partying, and she was only concerned with her own appearance. Stacy did not get out of beauty salons, which of course gave its fruits. The girl looked great, well-groomed, spectacular, stylish. Eleanor spent the lion's share of the money that Sami left for the household on herself and her daughter. Lexi got the leftovers. Eleanor worked in the kitchen and around the house only when Sami was home, creating the image of the perfect housewife. She didn't work herself, explaining to her husband that the girls needed special supervision now, because it was a difficult age. "Keep an eye on the teenagers," Eleanor assured him. At that time, Sami agreed with her arguments. She had a knack for convincing others of the reasonableness and profitability of her decisions. It was her talent. Sammy even sincerely believed that he himself proposed to his wife to deal with the house and children, and appreciated this, as it seemed to him, Eleanor's self-sacrifice. Leaving a career for the sake of family happiness and well-being, it is almost a feat. Eleanor had a great influence on his father. He looked at her with admiring eyes, believed every word she said, thought she was perfect and infallible. Lexi used to love it. She was happy for a loved one who had been lonely for so many years. And now, finally, he had found his love. But now the girl was hurt and even scared. Eleanor gradually turned from a kind, sensitive woman into a monster. The stepmother was making higher and higher demands on Lexi. Every day the girl was bombarded with reproaches. And she cooks wrong, and cleans too slowly, and pays a lot of attention to nonsense. "What do you want from this bandura?" Contemptuously pointed Eleanor a perfect manicure on the guitar. "Your tedious songs are already giving me a headache." Lexi remained silent. She knew that if she opened her mouth and tried to defend herself, she'd be bombarded with insults. It had been done before. Better to remain silent. The stepmother would calm down faster that way. Eleanor was not satisfied with Laurel's passion for music. She repeatedly called the girl talentless, constantly asked to play quietly, as if it was possible, forced stepdaughter to skip lessons at music school. Only here music was a real salvation for the girl. Playing soothed, relaxed, gave joy. There was so little joy in Lexi's life. With her father, of course, Eleanor behaved very differently. Lexi couldn't get used to the metamorphosis. A caring mother, a wonderful hostess, a loving wife, her father often said how lucky he was to have met such a woman. But in fact, Eleanor slowly turned the man against his daughter. Carefully, delicately, masterfully she acted. She appeared to Sami as a worried parent Lexi is going through puberty. She snaps, she's lazy, she hates everyone around her. She's behind in her schoolwork. She's only thinking about going out and sneaking out of the house. Eleanor said these words to her father, not really caring if Lexi could hear them. The woman didn't care. A man wouldn't believe his daughter's excuses. Eleanor's influence was too strong, too skillful at manipulating those around her. What to do? Sami looked at his wife in puzzlement. He was waiting for advice, help, and support. Of course, the man loved his daughter and didn't want her to lose her way. But Eleanor used persuasive, colorful language. "I think she should drop out of music school," the stepmother once suggested. "Lexi spends too much time on nonsense and her studies are suffering. I think under the guise of music school, she's hanging out with bad company. I talked to the music teacher. There's a lot of truancy." Father, as usual, agreed. Eleanor's words were always decisive. When Sami informed his daughter that she would no longer be involved in music, Lexi immediately knew whose business it was. It was the first time the girl had openly objected. She was standing up for her life's work, and therefore suddenly became bold and decisive. "No, I don't want to quit music school. Eleanor just wants me to spend more time at home and do all the housework. I cook, I clean, I do the laundry. I'm like a maid while you're away." "See?" Eleanor looked at her husband, confused and worried. "See how she reacts? All I'm doing is teaching the child to work. It's nothing special. All normal families have chores. But Lexi just wants to party and be free. It's dangerous at her age. Look at your daughter." Lexi had a temper. She snapped. It played right into Eleanor's hands. She portrayed an understanding woman who wasn't offended by the teenager's temper, but worried about her, wishing her well. Lexi had tried to complain to her father about Eleanor before, but he hadn't taken her words seriously. "I mean, his new wife is so perfect," Sami said, stroking his daughter's head. "You're just jealous. I'll try to pay more attention to you." No matter what Lexi said, it didn't sound convincing. After all, her father had been constantly manipulated by Eleanor, a skilled manipulator. And after this open fight, Lexi's words didn't matter to Sammy at all. At least the girl thought so. By the way, Lexi still had to leave music school. Her father had insisted. The girl lost her only outlet. She did, of course, occasionally play for herself. It somehow relieved the stress that Lexi was now under all the time. Every once in a while, Eleanor pitted father and daughter against each other to consolidate the effect. She played people like chess pieces. The father was at the mercy of his bewitching wife. He was sure that she had made a monster out of his sweet daughter, and he thanked fate that during this difficult period he had an experienced and attentive woman by his side. At first, Lexi still tried to get through to her parent, but every time after that, Eleanor arranged something new. Once, Stacy had taken money from the family stash. Lexi knew it. The girl had heard Stacy begging her mother for money to go on a trip to New York with friends. Eleanor had refused her daughter, explaining that she didn't like the girl's company at all. But Stacy was not used to restrictions. She did go to New York, which made Eleanor furious. She reprimanded her daughter on the phone, threatened and ordered her to return urgently. Of course, Stacy had no intention of obeying. She wasn't that kind of person. Of course, both Eleanor and Lexi understood where the girl had gotten the money Sammy's stash. But when her father returned, her stepmother blamed Lexi for everything. Stacy was already home at the time and pretended to be a model high school student. She was like her mother in her acting abilities and even surpassed her. Didn't her father scold his daughter then? Eleanor asked. No, Sammy answered. He talked to her for a long time, trying to find out why she needed such a sum of money. Maybe you're in trouble? Maybe you need help? Sammy asked. Lexi tried to explain to her parent how things really were. He squeezed her hands even tighter and begged her not to lie to him. Tell the truth, the father pleaded, taking his daughter's hands in his. What's going on with you? Lexi didn't say anything else. It was useless. Her father thinks she is a troubled teenager capable of stealing. What can I say? Eleanor's words have proven to be a powerful tool. A man doesn't trust his daughter but takes his wife's every word at face value. And there was nothing the girl could do about it. As time went on, the moment of Stacy's enrollment in the university was approaching. Lexi realized that the girl would fail miserably. I wonder how her stepmother would explain it to her father. She'd been working hard on her daughter's image all these years. In her stories, she portrayed Stacy as a smart, diligent student, a gifted girl. Eleanor was always comparing the girls, and Stacy always outperformed Lexi in everything. But that's okay, Eleanor urged her wife. If I raised one girl so successfully, I can do the same with your daughter. I know how to raise girls at a certain age. They need a firm hand. Her father agreed with Eleanor and lightheartedly handed over all rights to Lexi's upbringing to her. You know best, he said to his wife. Lexi somehow even got used to this life. The reproaches, the ridicule, the indifference, the shifting of most household duties onto the teenager's shoulders, the restrictions and everything. Lexi sometimes felt like Cinderella. Eleanor was the textbook stepmother. It's true what they say, a tale is a tale with a lie in it. And then, in her father's absence, Vincent, a young man, stylishly dressed, always smiling and polite, began to visit Eleanor. The woman explained to the girls that he was her distant relative. But Vincent looked at Eleanor with such eyes that Lexi knew her stepmother was lying. Stacy didn't believe her mother either. She smiled wryly every time this guest appeared in the house. Now Eleanor could afford not to come home at night, and Lexi knew exactly what was going on. The situation had gone too far. The stepmother had a lover, this same Vincent, young, attractive, charming, in love up to his ears. The girl felt bad for her father. He trusted his wife so much, and she. The girl also tried to understand why Eleanor needed this man. After all, stepmother did not do anything for nothing. If she allowed a man into her circle, it was only to capitalize on it. Vincent came into Eleanor's life for a reason. Maybe it was a matter of feelings, though. The man was good-looking, like the models in the magazines. Even Stacy gave him a special look. Lexi tried to tell her father what was going on. Carefully, she outlined to him the situation with the man who sometimes came to their house in Eleanor's regular absences. "Father," he said glumly, "are you telling the truth? You're not trying to smear Eleanor again? You're always quarreling." "Papa, it's the truth." The girl almost shouted. She felt that her father did not fully believe her, but still she had put doubt in his soul. Of course, Sammy had talked to his wife. She must have explained everything in her own way, maybe even complained about Lexi, who supposedly lies all the time and argues with everyone out of a spirit of contradiction. Lexi heard every word her stepmother said. The girl clenched her fists with powerlessness and anger. Eleanor looked and sounded, as always, very convincing. Unlike Lexi herself, a resentful, transitional-aged girl with problematic behavior. Sammy didn't know what to do. Quit his dream job again and go back to the big time. True, that would be even harder to do now. After all, he was supporting not only himself and his daughter, but also two strangers. He's taken on the responsibility of providing for his family. Lexi's completely out of control. I guess she needs her dad around. But how do you get off the boat? Making a pittance isn't an option anymore. Eleanor is charming, beautiful, smart, sophisticated. Sammy was smitten with this woman at first sight. They met just in time for a mutual friend's anniversary. And then it turned out that Eleanor and Sammy could help each other. It was like a jigsaw puzzle. At first, Lexi was thrilled with her stepmother and stepsister. Her father's eyes lit up with a happy fire. She was so excited to have Eleanor and Stacy move in with them. Then, leaving on the voyage, Sammy was calm. Her daughter was in good hands. Coming home was much more pleasant, too. What happiness it is when you are waiting impatiently for your favorite woman, and even so beautiful. Sammy had forgotten it could be like that. The man envied himself. And then came Lexi's infamous puberty. It was like the kid had been replaced. The girl was now lazy and snappy, lying and skipping classes, trying to argue with her stepmother and father. She made up stories about Stacy, reacted inappropriately to ordinary requests. And once she even took a decent amount of money out of the family piggy bank. Wonder what she needed that kind of money for. Sammy was afraid that his daughter had gotten involved with bad company, especially since Eleanor thought so too. Lexi was always complaining about her stepmother. No wonder she was raising her stepdaughter, restricting her freedom, and oh my, making her clean up after herself. It was much more pleasant to be lazy all day, not bothering with lessons and household chores. To live at your own pleasure. Of course, Eleanor was in the girl's way now. So she rebelled. Sammy understood that, but he didn't know how to help his daughter get through this difficult age with the least possible loss. He'd never understood Lexi at all. It was a shame they didn't give you an instruction manual with your baby. And now Lexi was overstepping her bounds. She hinted that Eleanor had a lover, some Vincent. The wife did not deny it. Indeed, her relative, who had recently moved to their town, had visited them. A busy young man who never took the time to get to know Sammy, working hard, trying to make his way in this life. But Lexi assured him that Eleanor was a lying monster and that Vincent was her lover. Sammy looked into his daughter's honest eyes and was horrified had Lexi become a slanderer and a liar. This was so unlike her. That's when the man decided to install a hidden surveillance camera in the apartment. He's going to record it. The clips will be streamed online to his phone. On his next visit, he'll provide Lexi with proof. She'll see the footage, realize how stupid and ugly her attempts to smear Eleanor look. Maybe then something in her head will click into place, and the girl will come to her senses. Nothing as sobering as looking at yourself from the outside. Sammy didn't expect to see this. At first, he was still feeling guilty, peeking at the homies as if he didn't trust them. That's a good one, I'll say. But the camera footage turned his mind upside down. Eleanor was really treating Lexi like a servant. She looked at her with contempt, made her work for the whole family. And these were impossible chores for a teenager. Lexi didn't just clean up after herself and run errands. She kept the whole house clean, scrubbed, cleaned the plumbing, cooked lunches and dinners, and received only reproaches and insults for it. No, when Sammy was home, Eleanor didn't act like that. The man couldn't believe his eyes. It made his heart bleed when Lexi appeared before him as a disenfranchised Cinderella. Was Eleanor really lying? Lying to him all the time, looking at him with such honest and loyal eyes. Lexi, how many times she tried to get through to her father. He didn't believe a word she said. That's awful. Poor girl. If he could, the man would now travel hundreds of kilometers and protect his daughter. With his own hands, he made his own child's life a nightmare. And the girl had come to him for help. But Sammy didn't believe her. Her daughter's words sounded like pathetic excuses. Lexi's stories about Vincent had also checked out. Indeed, the young man sometimes came to their house, and he hugged Eleanor in an unrelated way. It was as if sparks were flying between Eleanor and Vincent. The camera was good. Sammy could hear every word they said. Vincent turned out to be an experienced and very expensive lawyer. Eleanor couldn't afford him, so she'd gone the usual route, using her strongest charms. Yes, they were lovers. The young lawyer must have been influenced by the natural magnetism of this woman. She, of course, had her own agenda. Sammy soon realized what it was. The plot of land in the village by the river was an inheritance left by his mother to her granddaughter Lexi. Eleanor knew this and was looking for a way to sell the property. She needed the money. Svetlana, her own daughter, would not enter the university on a budget the girl never bothered to study. Eleanor realized that Sammy, no matter how much he was in love with her, would never agree to sell Lexi's inheritance. That's why she needed Vincent as Lexi's guardian. Eleanor had the right to manage her stepdaughter's estate until she came of age. The woman was going to sell the property and use the proceeds to pay for Svetlana's education. But Sammy could not know about it. Vincent, as an experienced lawyer, helped his mistress in this case. Eleanor knew how to manipulate people like no one else. Realizing what was happening, Sammy clenched his fists in impotent anger. Lexi couldn't be left alone around these horrible people. There's still plenty of time before the end of the business trip, but he'll cut it short. Lexi is in danger. Lexi struggled to hold back her tears. There was no need for Svetlana to see how hard it was for her. She and her mother deliberately drove her to breakdowns. The girl repeatedly made ugly scenes in front of her father, because she couldn't hold it all in. This played into the stepmother's hands. Now Eleanor accused Lexi of vagrancy, carefully creating in her father's eyes the image of a neglectful daughter who was rude and lazy. Lexi had only spent the night at a friend's house. She'd warned Eleanor about it over the phone. Do whatever you want, her stepmother tossed indifferently into the phone. I don't care. Of course she didn't care. Lexi had scrubbed the entire apartment the day before and prepared food for a couple days. Otherwise, her stepmother wouldn't have let her out of the house either. When Lexi returned home the next morning, she found police officers in the apartment. At first, the girl thought it was Svetlana. She often disappeared at night, and Eleanor periodically went to get her daughter out of trouble. Found the missing person, the policeman clarified to Eleanor. She nodded her head. That's when Lexi realized what this was all about. Her stepmother had reported to the police that her underage stepdaughter hadn't come home for the night, even though she knew exactly where she was. I told you I was going to stay at my friend's house, Lexi stretched out in amazement as she looked at her stepmother. The girl had already guessed that the woman had come up with a new way to make her stepdaughter look like a troubled teenager, this time involving the police. You're cheating again. Sobbing, Eleanor said. What am I going to do with you? One more trick like that and we'll put her on the register, the policeman warned as he left the apartment. Accounting. That was probably what the stepmother was after. And now Lexi was trying not to cry. She hugged the bear her stepfather had once given her and realized that she would be exposed to her father as a missing girl again. And he, as always, will unconditionally believe his wife, will look at his daughter with sad, anxious eyes. That look, full of pain and disappointment, is so hard to bear. Suddenly, a key turned in the door. Lexi stirred. Who could it be? Svetlana and Eleanor were home. Her father would be at sea for another 3 weeks. Had Eleanor given the key to her Vincent? Just what was missing. But in the hallway came father's voice, "I'm home." "You're back so soon?" Eleanor's voice sounded confused and lusciously joyful at the same time. What happiness. I know everything. Her father clearly did not share her elation. "I've seen and heard everything. Pack your things. You have until this evening. You will do nothing more to my daughter." Lexi's heart raced like a caged bird. She rushed into the hallway and hung around her father's neck. How he found out about everything Lexi would find out later. Right now, it didn't even matter. Sami held his daughter in a tight hug. He smelled like the sea. "Is everything going to be okay now?" the man cooed. "I'm sorry for not believing you. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Maggie wandered reluctantly to the hospital, carrying a child beneath her heart. And as soon as the old woman touched her hand, "You've always been like this, since you were a little girl. All children sit normally. What they're given, they play with. But you always wanted more than the other kids." As if you were better than the others, Maggie was silent. She knew that when stepmother Anastasia was in such a mood, it was best not to argue with her. Actually, Anastasia wasn't a bad woman. At least when she'd started living with Maggie's father and moved into the house with her son Stephen, who was only a year older than Maggie, she'd always given the kids the same fair and square treatment. Stepmother was easily turned on, as Stephen had said, but easily calmed down. Unlike Eden's father, it took some effort to make him angry. But if he got angry, it was everyone, so it was easier for Maggie to admit to her childish pranks right away. It was Anastasia, of course, who was the first to grab her heart and start wailing. "Oh, you freaks did it again. You're not going to clean up this mess. I'm not angry with you. Why? All children are like children, but I have devils, pranksters." After that, the delinquent children were punished, and their misdeed was never mentioned again. But when the stepmother learned that the stepdaughter after graduation is going to enter the city, she could not calm down for a long time. Her father, of course, was not happy either, but as usual, he did not express his feelings. At first, Anastasia hoped that Maggie would come to her senses and stay in her native village, as Stephen had done. But the girl, unlike her half-brother, always knew that her place was not here. She dreamed of going to the city and becoming a fashion designer, clothing designer, or stylist. Maggie didn't know the exact name of her future profession. But she was sure that she would make people beautiful, like her mother Bella Swan. She remembered her mom vaguely. She'd left when Maggie was 7. But when her daughter remembered her, the image of a light fairy from a fairy tale came to mind. Big blue eyes, blonde hair almost as long as Maggie's own. Slim figure, fair skin, gentle voice and dreamy gaze. In their village, Mama Bella Swan seemed like a creature from another world. She didn't know how to dig a garden or milk a cow. Daddy Eden did all the housework. Sometimes his grandmother, his mother, helped. She did not like her daughter-in-law, who was not adapted to country life, and often remembered with unkind words the day her son brought her from the city. Mama Bella Swan liked to do only 2 things: bake and sew clothes. And she did the former while sewing. Maggie still kept her childhood dresses made by her mom's hands. Except that when Maggie was 7, her mom disappeared. The girl could not understand what happened for a long time. She kept asking her father where her mother was and when she would return. He was silent. The grandmother gave the answer. "She left you? She left me. She ran back to the city. She couldn't live here. I told Eden as soon as he brought her back, I told him she wasn't right for you. She's so blissful. She doesn't belong here. I hope I'll grow up okay with you at least. Probably in order for her granddaughter to grow up normal. Grandmother Anna found her son a second wife herself. Simple, economical, experienced in the family business. Anastasia, she said to Eden, is a normal woman. She has already given birth to a son, kept everything and nothing. She can manage such a household on her own. Let's join her yard with yours and we'll live like people. The son obeyed and got married. And though in some ways Anastasia had replaced Maggie's mother, the girl had never forgotten her mother. Somewhere deep inside, she was sure that she would find her mother when she came to town. Surely she had already become the most famous fashion designer, and her daughter would be the same. They will meet at some fashion show, and her mother will immediately recognize her and be proud of her. And now, finally, that day has come. Even her stepmother's loud displeasure as she walked her to the bus couldn't dampen her mood today. Anastasia put her stepdaughter in what she thought was the best seat. She made sure the old brown leather suitcase was squeezed firmly between the seats. "All right," she said sternly, glancing glumly out the window. "You write there how to settle in." Suddenly the stepmother bent down sharply and awkwardly kissed her stepdaughter on the cheek. Then, as if frightened, she also abruptly recoiled and got off the bus. Maggie could see her rapidly receding back through the window. She's a good girl after all, she thought suddenly, even though she's not a mom. Maggie once again scrutinized the list from beginning to end. Her last name was not there. "Didn't get in?" sympathetically asked a short, skinny red-haired girl wearing funny glasses with repair tape instead of frames. "It was just a mistake," Maggie said confidently. "I'm sure I did." The red-haired girl shrugged her shoulders. "If you're sure, go to the dean. He has all the lists. If you want, I'll walk you there." Maggie nodded. As they walked down the narrow, dark hallway, she asked, "What's your name?" "Trixie, short for Taisia." "And I'm Maggie, short for Maria." "And you got in here?" The girl laughed in surprise. "No, but I didn't apply here." "Then what are you doing here?" "I was just passing by. It's hot outside, so I thought I'd come in and sit for a while. It's interesting to look at applicants, how they are happy, sad, studying this list with such hope that it hurts." Maggie was surprised at this way of spending her time, but she decided not to let it show. They were just approaching the dean's office. "Come on," Trixie encouraged her. "I'll wait for you here." Maggie knocked gently. A muffled voice came from the other side of the door. "Come in." A short, stout, gray-haired man with glasses sat in the office. "Yes, yes," he asked cheerfully without raising his head. "What is the question?" "I'm about enrollment. It seems that they forgot to put me on the list of those who passed the exams." The dean raised his head and looked at the girl in surprise. "Last name, first name, middle name?" "Bella Swan." "Just a moment." The dean pulled up a thick pile of sheets with students' names on them, flipped through it, found the right one, and read it carefully from beginning to end, frowned and looked at Maggie. "There is no mistake, Bella Swan. You didn't get in." "Not even close to a passing grade," he added softly, seeing the girl's frustrated face. "Try again next year, but prepare properly, okay?" Maggie nodded and walked out of the office. Trixie, as promised, was waiting for her in the corridor, looking at the stand with the history of the department with interest. "What's up?" she asked. "Did you figure it out?" Maggie nodded, feeling tears come to her eyes. "We're done. I didn't get in." Oh man, I sympathize. Trixie looked at her sympathetically. Don't worry, you'll get in next year. My older sister got into Moscow State University only for the second time. Nothing. She graduated with a red diploma. Maggie smiled languidly. Great. Come on, let's get out of here. Outside, as it happened, it was especially nice. The sun was shining dazzlingly, the birds were singing. The flowers in the flower near the university filled the air with a lusciously sweet fragrance. It was as if no one in the world cared that her dreams had just been shattered. Where are you going? Trixie asked. Maybe we should go the same way. Actually, I'd like a coffee and a snack right now. What do you think of the offer? I'm going to the train station, Maggie said, and shook the hand she was holding her suitcase with a slight shake. I'm not from here, I came from the village. Oh, how long does it take to get home? 4 hours by bus. No relatives here? Maggie wanted to say mom, but held herself back and shook her head negatively. Trixie looked at her pensively, as if she were thinking about something. Finally, she asked, Do you want to go back home to the village? No. Then let's go for coffee, and then we'll figure it out. They walked to the little red car, threw the suitcase in the trunk. It won't be comfortable for coffee, Trixie said. They ordered coffee without getting out of the car. They just drove up to some window. Trixie dictated the order, and almost immediately a smiling girl in a uniform gave them everything. Maggie didn't even know they could do that. It's good, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. Thank you for the treat. You're welcome. What was your plan in case you didn't get in? Maggie sighed and lowered her eyes. I didn't have a plan. Oh boy. Are you really such a naive country girl? What kind of life did you expect? Maggie put the paper cup in the cup holder and opened the car door. Thanks for the coffee. I'm going to go. Trixie laughed and grabbed her arm. Okay, I'm sorry. It's not like I said that to hurt your feelings. It's just that life is so unpredictable. You have to be prepared for anything. The naive country girl sighed and sat back down. I don't want to go back to the village, Trixie. It's the only option I have. I thought I'd study, live in a dormitory, get a scholarship, then get a job. Well, you can stay at my place, get a job, and study for your degree at the same time. Maggie looked at her incredulously. Why would you do that? The girl shrugged her thin, pale shoulders, covered with freckles. Why not? After saying that, she started the car and drove Maggie to her house. Trixie lived in a large 2-bedroom apartment on the first floor of an old 9-story building. It must have been renovated about 20 years ago. But as soon as Maggie walked in, she immediately felt the cozy atmosphere. It was obvious that Trixie had grown up here, and everything was the same as it had been when she was a child. In the first room was a piano with stacks of yellowed sheets of sheet music on it. Next to it was an old chair upholstered in cracked brown leather, the swivel leg of which creaked with every movement. Opposite the instrument, an old and slightly worn sofa stood against the wall, and above it hung bookshelves with a few photo frames mixed in with old novels with yellowed pages. Your parents? Maggie asked. Trixie nodded. Why is Daddy in that weird suit? He's playing Boris Godunov. He's an actor, an opera singer. Wow, that's great. Who's Mom? A diplomat. So is my older sister. Wow. Trixie shrugged her shoulders. Let's keep looking. Come on. The second room was a bedroom. There was a big bed, a tall, ceiling-high wooden closet, and shelves full of dolls. Mom brought them back from every trip, Trixie explained. Maggie remembered that she had only had 2 dolls as a child. The first was a bald rubber puffball that she thought her mom had bought for her. The second was a Barbie doll her stepmother had given her for some New Year's Eve gift. "I think you'll live in the 3rd room," Trixie said thoughtfully. "It's kind of like a guest room." The 3rd room had a fold-out couch, a wide dark dresser, and a television on top of it. A desk and chair took up almost all the rest of the space. "Thank you," Maggie said and set the suitcase down. "Okay, go ahead and unpack and grab the towels and linens from the dresser. Don't be shy." "In the bathroom. The toilet is just to the right of the front door. Get some rest. Maybe you need to sleep or just lie down. I'll do my own thing. I'll take the boys out tonight." Maggie had never been to a country house, especially one so big and beautiful. The huge 3-story brick house was full of cheerful young guys and girls, most of whom seemed to her too tipsy because of drinking and loud music. She felt like a stranger in this company. Trixie introduced Maggie to everyone, introducing her as her new friend and future clothing designer. Maggie smiled shyly and wished she could fall through the ground. She didn't remember anyone. All the cheerful faces seemed equally alien. Absent-mindedly taking the plastic cup of wine in her hand, she stepped aside. Then she saw the back door to the yard open and slipped through it. It was much quieter outside. Sure, there was some hugging couple sitting on a bench near the porch. But farther back in the garden, where a white gazebo stood between the trees, there seemed to be no one. That's where Maggie went. She sat down on a bench, put a glass of wine on the railing, and closed her eyes. Why is such a beautiful girl sad all alone? A pleasant male voice sounded directly above her. Maggie opened her eyes and saw a tall, handsome guy. Taylor. He introduced himself. "Maggie." "Nice to meet you," she replied. "So what are you missing?" Taylor asked. "I don't know anyone there. We've all still had a lot to drink," Maggie admitted. Taylor raised his eyebrows and scratched the back of his head. "I'm sober, and we just met," he said, and sat down next to her. "Is it nice out here?" "Yes, it is," Maggie agreed. Taylor's eyes did seem completely sober, big, dark eyes that stared at her so intently that Maggie felt hot and cold at the same time. She wished he'd go away or sit here with her until morning. "Well, get up, you're late for work." Maggie knocked insistently on her friend's door. No one answered. Sighing, the girl pushed the door open and entered. Her friend was sleeping sweetly, covered with a blanket, with only her left heel sticking out from underneath. Maggie almost rolled her until she woke up with a squeal and threw the blanket to the floor. "She's awake," Maggie said with satisfaction. Her friend sat up on the bed and wiped her eyes unhappily. "Where did you get all that strength, Maggie? I heard you were back in the morning again." "I was out with Taylor." "Haven't you had enough of him for a month?" Maggie smiled embarrassedly. "And you were reading again until the wee hours of the morning. Did you want something interesting?" "Yeah, Eden gave me his new novel to review. It's still a draft, but it's entertaining." "Okay, let's eat breakfast quickly. I can drop you off at work. Then you wash up," Maggie said. "I'll make breakfast. I'll put it on the table." "In the kitchen?" her friend asked. "Did you ever regret working as a janitor? Just tell me. I'll find you something more suitable." Maggie shook her head. "No, I like everything. And there's a lot to learn," she said simply. "For real." Maggie squared her shoulders proudly, head held high. Maggie said, "Concal. I'm also there washing windows and taking out the trash. I'm not afraid of hardship." "But seriously," continued the proud cleaning lady, "there's definitely a lot to learn. Even just by listening to Anastasia yell at her assistants." Well, I won't interfere with your learning process, she grinned. When Maggie woke up in her new friend Stephanie's apartment after a weekend at the cottage, it was clear to her that she needed to look for a job. Even though Stephanie had said she didn't have to pay for housing, she still needed money for groceries, transportation, and everything else. And Maggie wasn't used to living on her own. But where would they take a young girl without education and residence registration? For some reason at that moment, Maggie remembered the words of her stepmother, who told her son Stephen, who had finished school and now didn't know where to go to work. Work is like mushrooms. They're always and everywhere full of them. If you want to find a job, go outside and look around. That's what Maggie did. She walked around for 2 hours, exploring the city, admiring the tall buildings, large green parks. When she was tired and went home, her eyes fell on a small ad full-time cleaning lady needed at Bella Swan Fashion House. Maggie went to the address listed. The Bella Swan Fashion House sign was visible from afar, huge, sleek white glossy letters on a black background. A high white marble porch led through transparent doors into a room with a ceiling on which Maggie could see paintings, flowers, clouds, angels, warriors on horseback, just like in a church. She had a thought to look more closely, but she felt dizzy and hastily lowered her gaze. "Young lady, who are you here to see?" A high-pitched woman's voice sounded. A slender woman in an airy white blouse and a very tight black skirt approached her. "Hello," Maggie said. "I'm here to see you. Do you need a cleaner?" "Yes," came a dry voice from somewhere in the back of the room. "Only we have very strict requirements. Not everyone can do it." The woman nodded, indicating with her eyes for Maggie to follow her. Together they walked through a completely empty whitewashed hall, save for the mannequins and clothes racks along the walls. At the back of the room stood a massive wooden table, piled with piles of colorful pieces of fabric, buttons of all different shapes and sizes, ribbons, belts, and more. Behind the table was a large black leather armchair where a woman in her 60s was sitting and smoking. She had very short gray hair and attentive black eyes that examined Maggie from head to toe. "I'm ready to start work today," Maggie said. Cassandra grinned. "Actually, we have one requirement: to clean well and do as we're told. That goes without saying. It's not even up for discussion. The main thing is to be inconspicuous, a quiet mouse." "I can do that," Maggie Shmilova said confidently. She looked at her assistant. "Stephanie, did you hear her? Get the girl processed." Cassandra took a drag on her cigarette. They ducked into a black leather folder with some drawings and photos. "Let's go quietly," Maggie whispered to Stephanie with just her lips. So the girl who had come from the village a few days ago got into one of the best fashion houses in the city, even as a cleaner. Only after seeing everything from the inside, Maggie realized how much her ideas about style, fashion, clothing design differed from reality. It became clear why she hadn't been accepted. It required a lot more than she thought. Maggie fulfilled Cassandra's requirement to be quieter than water. Lower than grass, she silently wiped mirrors, checking for dust, collecting fabric scraps. Maggie caught every word of her boss, tried to memorize every image created in the studio. And though she worked every day from morning till evening, she didn't feel tired at all. Especially since Taylor picked her up in the evenings. Maggie had never met anyone like him before. He was amazingly energetic, cheerful, and always in a good mood. All the men Maggie had seen in her home village, whether they were 15 or 50, were always preoccupied with one thing: where to make money and how much booze to buy with it. Also, tomorrow was a day off. Taylor had promised to pick her up tonight and surprise her. She didn't feel like getting up in the morning. It had been a busy month, and Maggie didn't want to miss the opportunity to lie in bed as long as she wanted. She'd never had that at home. Her stepmother always woke her and her roommate up at the crack of dawn and came up with a job. Maggie still remembered the night before her birthday, molding dumplings all morning. The thought of change made her nauseous. The girl opened her eyes, stretched, and sleep finally left her, and an unpleasant sensation originating somewhere in her stomach traveled up her esophagus. Maggie jumped up and ran to the bathroom. "Trixie," she said indignantly to her friend, walking into the kitchen. "I can smell from the room that these eggs are stale. Why? You're frying them." Trixie looked up from her book in surprise, looked at her friend, stood up, walked over to the skillet, and sniffed her nose. "I bought them yesterday. What makes you think they're stale?" The smell of them made me sick. Maggie opened the window wide, the fresh air making her feel better. Trixie frowned. "When were you supposed to get your period?" Maggie didn't immediately realize what her friend meant. "I don't know," she answered, confused. "I think it should have started by now." "I wonder. Take a test. Get one from my shelf in the bathroom." "I don't know how to do them." Trixie sighed. "Come on, I'll tell you." A little while later, when Trixie had already put breakfast on plates, having first drained the butter from her portion into her porridge, she returned to the kitchen. "Positive," Trixie said. "Wow, I don't know what to say. Depends on whether you were expecting it or not." "I wasn't," Maggie admitted honestly. "But I'm really excited, and I think Taylor will be happy too." "Well, that's great. So I finally got to meet him. He's picking me up tonight. I'll ask him to come over." "All right, pregnant woman. Let's have breakfast." All day Maggie was in high spirits. She was surprised by the news, but it felt like it was meant to be. She still had to tell her father and stepmother. At that moment, Maggie remembered that she had not yet written to them as she had promised. They don't even know she didn't get in, and they probably think Maggie is the same old student. She felt ashamed. How could she have forgotten to write to them? Her dad probably thinks she left him, or even ran away like her mom. She also remembered Anastasia kissing her goodbye and asking her to write. Okay, at least she had a story to tell now. She has a job, she's actively preparing for college. There's a fiancé, there's going to be a baby. This evening, Taylor was running late. He was supposed to pick her up another half hour ago. "Let's call," Trixie said. "What if his car broke down or something?" "I don't have his phone number," Maggie said. "How come?" "I don't know. I didn't get it somehow. We saw each other almost every day and agreed in advance when we'd see each other next time. And during the day we're both at work, so we don't have time to talk." Trixie frowned. "Do you know where he works?" "No." "Okay, what's his last name?" "No, I didn't ask." Okay, Trixie came over to her friend, gave her a hug. "Let's wait till tomorrow. If he doesn't show up, we can go to his house." Maggie paced the room. "Trixie, what if something happened to him?" "Maggie, what could have happened to him? Even if it did, you wouldn't know about it. So we wait till tomorrow and then we go." She didn't sleep much that night. Images of Taylor getting into a car accident, being attacked by bullies, or the rope breaking in the elevator he was riding in came to mind. She slept for a couple hours and woke up early feeling completely wrecked. "Trixie," she knocked gently on the door of that room's door. "Sunday at 0800. Let's get at least another hour of sleep." "Let's go, please. I can't take it anymore." Okay, Trixie stretched sleepily and looked at her worried friend carefully. I can't say no to a pregnant woman. No one opened the door for him. Maggie was nervous. She was already pounding desperately on the door, palms smacking away. She hadn't taken her finger off the bell button for probably 5 minutes before that. Trixie stood by her side and grew increasingly gloomy. "We should probably call the police," Maggie said. "What if he's lying there unconscious on the floor?" "Yeah," Trixie said in a strange, colorless tone. At that moment, the door to the apartment across the hall opened. "Why all the noise in the morning?" A sleepy woman in her 40s in a robe asked unhappily. "I'm sorry," Maggie turned to her. "It's just that the guy who lives here won't answer the door. We're worried something's happened to him." "Why are you looking for him?" the neighbor asked even more unhappily. "He moved out yesterday." "Moved out how?" "He ordered a car in silence. They carried some things all evening. He came out with the bags himself." "It wasn't his apartment?" Trixie asked. "No, of course not. He must have rented it for a year or so." "I see," Trixie said. "Thank you. We'll be on our way." She took Maggie firmly by the elbow and led her toward the elevator. The roommate hummed and slammed the door shut. "I don't get it," Maggie said as they rode home. "How could he leave like that without a word?" Trixie pressed her lips together and gripped the steering wheel even tighter. It was like she'd been fighting herself for a while, but she still said it. "Maggie, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I think there's nothing wrong with Taylor. He was just using you while it suited him. And now he's probably moved on to other things and other women." "How can you say that about him?" Trixie twisted the steering wheel sharply and braked. She turned to her friend, glaring at her. "Maggie, wake up. Do you think it's normal to date a man for a month and not know anything about him? No last name, no place of employment, no phone number? Do you think it was an accident?" Maggie was silent. Trixie saw tears running down the girl's cheeks. All the anger went away at once. "I'm sorry, baby," Trixie said. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just can't have you living in an illusion and making excuses for him." The tears rolled down as if on their own. My head felt empty. Strangely, Maggie felt no pain at that moment. On the contrary, everything inside her felt frozen. "Shit. I wish I could come with you," Trixie sighed. "They're the ones who'll tell us the sex of the baby today." "Yeah," Maggie said, trying to button her long, narrow-down jacket. "And don't worry about the ultrasound, I feel great, and it's only 4 bus stops from work. By the way, how did the fashion house feel about your pregnancy?" Maggie sighed. "Cassandra doesn't know yet. She doesn't see anything but outfits, I think. And she certainly won't be looking at some cleaning lady. Alice, on the other hand, is guessing, even though I've widened my uniform and I'm less conspicuous. She's giving me weird looks. I guess I'll be able to hide it for a month or 2, and then it's over. I'm afraid they'll fire me if they find out." "It's illegal," Trixie said. "So don't worry, if they do, I'll send the labor inspectorate after them. In fact, I told you can stay with me as long as you want, even when you're not working. You can't go back to the country. Have you written to your parents?" "I just told them I didn't get in and got a job." "And? Are they arguing, calling you back?" Oddly enough, no, Maggie grinned. "My stepmother actually answered the letter. I don't know what my father said, but she says I'm doing great and I'll definitely get in next year. It's kind of scary, to be honest." "Well, she probably missed you and compared how to live without the help of a second woman in the house. We should go see them, but later." "All right, I'm off to work. I'll see you tonight." It seems Swan noticed a change in her co-worker's appearance today after all. Here's the revised text. Even though Maggie tried to turn her back, Swan did notice her changed figure. When the workday was over, she called Maggie into her office. "Is she going to fire me?" Maggie thought, wiping her sweaty palms on her pants. "She will." Swan was smoking as usual and looking at the sketches on the desk in front of her. "Sit down," she said, pointing to the chair beside her. Maggie sat down, trying to retract her stomach as much as possible, which of course was no longer retracting. "This or this?" Swan asked, running up to her 2 pictures for the window display. Yes, the centerpiece will be standing in the center of. This Maggie pointed confidently to the left photo. It looks more flamboyant. The second image looks casual. And this one reflects the collection you've been working on. And also, I think it puts you in a New Year's mood. People will look at it and immediately think that the holiday is coming soon. Not bad, Swan said thoughtfully, looking at the picture again. By the way, I called you here for a reason. It's about to start, Maggie thought. Would you like to be a junior assistant in the future? Maggie looked at her boss in surprise. She looked completely serious. I do. Good. Don't be surprised. Alice told me about his plans to go into the fashion world. I'm not blind myself. I see that you do not miss a single word. Even with a belly floor and so on cannot help, sighed Swan. I'm old, of course, but I'm not blind yet. So you're not going to fire me? Maggie asked cautiously. Have you been listening to anything I've said? No, get out of here, work while you can. Swan abruptly opened the sketchbook and stared at it. Maggie knew better than to approach her boss at times like this. She stood up carefully, whispered a thank you, and walked out. The bus was long gone. Maggie stepped from foot to keep warm. Besides her, there was only a little old lady at the bus stop. Though Maggie didn't like to stare at strangers, this woman caught her eye. She was wearing a long red plaid wool coat, and in her arms sat a large black cat that watched Maggie closely with big green eyes. Finally, the bus pulled up and Maggie and the old woman got on. Pay up. At the entrance, the driver shouted so sharply that the girl almost dropped her bag. She paid, went through and sat on the first seat of the empty bus. The old woman stopped in the aisle, grabbed the cat and began to look for something in a small beaded black purse. Well, the driver asked impatiently. Now, just a minute, the old woman replied politely. A coin has fallen somewhere. Probably the lining is loose. The driver sighed noisily. The old woman searched her bag even harder. The cat meowed unhappily. Take it, said Maggie, holding out the money to the driver. He hummed, but said nothing. The girl returned to her seat. The old woman sat down next to her. Thank you, my dear. You're welcome. Can you tell me when the stop factory is? I get off at the polyclinic. Just before it, I'll tell you. Are you going for an ultrasound? The old lady asked. How did you guess? The woman smiled, stroked the cat, and pointed at Maggie's belly with her eyes. Stomach. It's not hard to do. Almost no one notices yet. It's not a long time. Especially since I have an experienced eye. I can tell you something else interesting. The black cat suddenly stood up, pulled himself up, and climbed from the old woman's lap to Maggie's lap. That's a good sign, said his mistress. Usually he doesn't approach strangers. Did he like you? Maggie stroked the cat. His fur was warm, almost hot. What did you want to tell me? The old woman smiled, closed her eyes, and suddenly began to sway slightly back and forth. You were an accidental child yourself, but you brought much joy with your birth. You will find your mother twice more. The first time hard, then for real. The path you've chosen now is the right one. Follow it, Ivan's daughter, and don't go back to the past. Look to the future. The old woman's voice was quiet and smooth, as if she had put Maggie into some kind of trance. She heard everything, understood everything, but it was as if time had slowed down. Every word of the unexpected prediction was etched in her memory. Girl, came the familiar rough voice of the driver. Girl, the clinic, you're getting off here. Maggie looked out the window. Yes, it was the right stop. She hadn't even noticed the bus had stopped. And the amazing thing was that the old lady and her cat were no longer on the next seat. The fetus is developing perfectly. All the indicators are normal. I don't see any pathology. The doctor, a young beautiful girl, was always friendly to Maggie, called her mommy, and always told her in clear words what she was doing and what the results of the examination were. "Mommy, do you want to know the sex of the baby?" Of course, Maggie said quietly, "It's a girl, Eden's daughter." "And name it." Maggie remembered the old woman's words. "Knew what?" The doctor interrogated. "Nothing, that's just it." "You say you're all right?" "Yes. How do you feel?" Maggie smiled. "I feel great. I feel like I have more energy and strength." "That's wonderful. How much longer can I work?" "You'll have to see how you feel. You're good for now." At home, Maggie was glad to lie on the couch and close her eyes. At last she could relax after an eventful day and think about everything. She could hardly define her attitude to fortune-tellers, clairvoyants, and other mystics. Though, of course, her upbringing in the village had left its mark. For example, Maggie remembered well how her stepmother periodically put a saucer of milk and a lump of sugar for the housekeeper. To keep the house in order, she explained to little Maggie. The children even tried several times to see the housekeeper. Once, after waiting for their parents to fall asleep, Stephen and Maggie snuck out of the room and hid behind the stove so that they could see the white saucer on the floor. Even after the house was completely dark, the saucer was dimly lit. They sat there until they fell asleep, but they never saw anything. But then there was less milk, and the sugar was chewed. One must properly remember what it was the old woman had said about Eden's daughter. "And name it." "Eden Smith." Beautiful, thought Maggie. Every time she remembered Eden, her heart clenched painfully. Maggie habitually dropped her hand to her stomach. She wouldn't admit it to Grace, but somewhere deep inside her, she still had hoped that Eden would come back. She'd even dreamed about him a few times. She'd wake up to find him in her bed, or he'd come to her work, or he'd ring the doorbell. The bottom line was the same Eden was telling her that it wasn't his fault that he had to leave her. Now he was back, and they would be together forever. And then Maggie woke up alone in a big empty bed every time. "You'll find your mother twice more." The first time hard, then for real she remembered the old woman's words. It was unclear what the second part meant, but it was best to focus on the first. She would find her mom. Somehow, with everything that had happened, finding her mother had taken a back seat. Maybe that's what she should do now, go see her father. He probably knows mom's relatives, friends, her old place of employment, or some addresses. Strange she hadn't thought of that before. About the putsch and the fact that one should look to the future, not the past, is not very clear yet, but she would think about that later. Maggie had a strange feeling as the bus pulled into her home village. She felt at the same time as if she had never left here, and as if she had never been here. These little old wooden houses smelled merrily of smoke from their chimneys. Shaggy dogs barked at the bus. Women in warm shawls and men in fur hats seemed near and far at the same time. It was as if Maggie had seen it all some time ago in a past life. She walked along the familiar streets and felt like a daughter who had returned to her homeland after years of wandering and hardship. But when she saw the house, she realized how much had changed in those 6 months. She had left here as a little girl, yesterday's schoolgirl, and returned as a future mother. Maggie's here," came the voice of her half-brother. Stephen was chopping wood. When he saw her, he dropped the axe right there on the woodpile and ran toward her, huge, with ruddy cheeks and hair sticking to his forehead. He rushed to his sister, hugged her tightly, lifted her up, and whirled her around. Stephen let go. Maggie laughed. "I'm very glad to see you too." My parents are home. Let's go home." They went into the house. Stephen put his huge arm around her shoulder and didn't want to let her go the whole way. Maggie suddenly thought that she hadn't even written to him once during this time, and she felt ashamed. Her half-brother had always treated her like a sibling. At home, she saw her stepmother first. She was standing at the flour-covered table, kneading dough as usual. Her father was nowhere to be seen, probably sitting in the TV room. "Mom, Maggie's here." Anastasia turned her head and gasped. For a moment it seemed to Maggie that her stepmother was glad to see her, and even as if she were about to hug her stepdaughter. But after a second, as if she had come to her senses, she put her hands to her sides and said angrily, "Well, look who has come to us." Not a word in 6 months. And here, unannounced, in broad daylight, she just dropped in like snow on our heads. The stepmother took a noisy breath, as if gaining air, and continued to grumble. "Why did you get up? As if it was the first time you came here to the stove. Hurry up and come in. I'm freezing." Her nose is white. "Stephen, make her some raspberry tea." Father appeared in the kitchen. He wiped his eyes in confusion and did not immediately realize what had caused the commotion. When he saw his daughter, he didn't even smile. "Hi, Daddy," Maggie said and hugged him. Her father gave her an odd hum and barely hugged her back. "Stay in your room for a while," Anastasia commanded. "We'll have dinner soon." Maggie and her father and brother went into the hall. It had been a long time ago. Anyway, they met when your father Eden came to New York for driver's training. I think he liked your mom Bella right away. Eden said he didn't understand why she was attracted to him. It was obvious she was from a wealthy family. I remember there was a strange story. She had a fight with her parents, or they'd moved away or died. Anyway, she and Eden hit it off real quick. And by the time he had passed his exams and was about to leave, she was the first to propose to him, "I want to live with you, and I want to live in the country." Maggie was surprised. For some reason, she had always thought that her father had tricked, or maybe through force, dragged her mother to the village. Then it became clear that the bride was pregnant. They were quickly married. Then you were born. And when she left, you might remember, you weren't so little. Maggie nodded. She remembered it very well. "Didn't your father say why she left?" Anastasia shrugged her shoulders. He only said that it quickly became clear to him that she didn't belong here. At first, Eden hoped that his wife would adjust to the village life. He took care of all the housework and sat with you whenever he could. But no, your mother was very homesick. It was as if nothing pleased her. "Not even me," Maggie said quietly. Anastasia reached out as if she wanted to pet her, but halfway through she pulled her hand back. "Eden said she loved you. That's why she lived with him for so many years. But she was getting worse every day. He knew that one day she would leave. And so she did." "I want to find her," Maggie said. "There must be some addresses, phone numbers, where she lived when they met. And her parents are my grandparents. Didn't they ever come to visit us?" "No," my father said. He came in unnoticed, and the women even flinched at the sound of his voice. Eden sighed heavily, sat down on a vacant chair and began to tell the story, looking directly at his daughter. "I tried to find her. There were no cell phones back then. The only address I knew was her then apartment, which she rented with a friend. 8 years later, other people were living there, and no one had heard of your mother. I never saw her parents either. I think she had a big fight with them and hadn't spoken to them for months when I met her. I don't even know if they know they have a granddaughter. I don't think she had any contact with anyone from the city while she lived in the village. Her parents seemed to be very rich people. That's all the information I have." "So there's no way to find her?" Maggie asked. Her father frowned. If she wanted to, she could have come here herself after all these years. If not to me, then at least to you. Or at least send her a birthday card. The trip to the village left Maggie with mixed impressions. She'd hoped so much to find a clue to her mother's whereabouts. And as much as she wanted to deny her father's words, they stabbed her very sorely. Surely her mother could have visited her in so many years. And since she hadn't, she didn't want to see her. All right, she'd have a daughter of her own soon. She has to take care of Masha too, Trixie asked her, telling her how she had traveled. After listening to her friend's long story, she sighed. What can I say? Your father is probably right. And really, you've got a lot of other things to do right now. There's a promotion coming up at work. Yeah, Maggie smiled as the thought of the job felt good. Of course, it's only called a junior assistant. In reality, there would be almost no difference in salary. Yes, and the work would consist mostly of serve and fetch. Stephanie also promised a theory test. You'll pass, Trixie said confidently. It's okay, everyone starts small, but you'll be one step closer to your dream. It's not like scrubbing floors. You're right, as always, Maggie agreed. All in all, I'm fine with it. I just miss Jason sometimes. Maggie glanced at Trixie, knowing she'd be unhappy at the mention of her estranged fiancé, but she made a sudden suggestion. I was thinking maybe we should ask people we know who were at the cottage the summer you met. Someone must have taken him there. They must know his close friends. Maybe parents, siblings? Don't, Trix. I was thinking the same thing. It's the same thing with Mom. If he wanted to, he would have contacted me a long time ago. But if I find him, what am I going to say? Hey, Jason, you bastard. Here's our daughter. Pay child support. Maggie shook her head. Well, no. Chloe is my daughter. I don't want him to have any rights over her. I raised her myself. If she asks who her father is, I'll tell her everything I know. Trixie sighed. Okay, that's up to you. I'll help you in any way I can. Thank you. The exam at Stephanie's Maggie's seemed perfectly easy. Even though Cassandra's assistant Marissa kept a nonchalant expression on her face, it was obvious that she was pleased. Lastly, she led the girl into the holy of holies of their fashion house, the so-called dressing room. Essentially a huge room with countless racks of clothes, shoes, and accessories. Their Stephanie had asked her to put together a few sets for different occasions. Maggie did it. Well, congratulations, Stephanie said. By the way, when is your due date? About the beginning of April. Well, that's not soon enough. Oh, that's great. Just in time to model in the spring show of Cassandra's new collection. Model? Maggie thought she heard wrong. I'm not a model. And I've got a huge belly already. It'll be just what you need, Stephanie said nonchalantly. Cassandra is currently designing a maternity collection. She wants to present it in late winter or early spring. And she wants you as a model? Maggie wondered. Oh, wow, but I'm not a professional model. It's no big deal, Stephanie assured her. We'll get you ready. There's plenty of time. In the meantime, here's a list of new responsibilities. Starting tomorrow, you're no longer a cleaning lady, but a junior assistant. Basically, you're doing the same thing as, say, me or Cassandra. You'll have to prepare clothes, shoes, coordinate fittings, make appointments, make sure all supplies are in sufficient quantities, and a lot of other things. By the way, how long do you plan to work? As long as I can, Maggie replied. I feel great, and the doctor said it's okay. That's good. Of course, after the birth, you'll go on maternity leave. We all understand that. But keep in mind that Cassandra won't be waiting for anyone for 3 years, or even a year and a half. I understand, Maggie replied. She didn't really know what to do. Trixie couldn't babysit, she was working, and there was no money for a nanny. Who else would she ask? Eden. I don't think he'd do it. All right, she'd think of something. For a moment, she thought Trixie was right, and she could find Taylor and ask him for help. He obviously didn't need the money. But Maggie felt sick to her stomach at the thought of him turning her down, lying, making excuses, or saying it wasn't his child. Surely he was counting on never seeing her again. No, Maggie wouldn't impose. There was plenty of work to do in her new position. Maggie even sometimes thought that if she had stayed as a cleaner, she would have moved much less. But the girl did not complain. She felt great. And at work she was ready to spend the night. And everything went easily and well with her, as it happens when a person is engaged in his work. Of course, pregnancy made its own adjustments. It was necessary to visit doctors, go to courses for pregnant women, buy things and furniture for the future baby. And then there is also preparation for the future enrollment and work. And with her friend Maggie tried to go out at least once a week. "Doesn't it feel weird?" she asked Trixie. "You and I are basically complete strangers to each other. We met by chance, and now I've been living in your apartment for 6 months. I've got a baby on the way. Of course, for me, you are an angel who came from heaven and saved me in the most difficult moment. Without you, I would have been sitting in the village, listening to my stepmother in Eden, milking cows. I'll always be grateful to you. But sometimes I feel like a parasite who has come to trust a good man, who lives at the expense of another." Her friends were sitting in front of the TV at that moment, watching some old romantic comedy and eating ice cream straight out of big plastic vases. Trixie cradled her spoon and shrugged. "No, this situation doesn't seem weird to me at all. Are you tricking me, plotting to nail me and clean me out, or re-sign the apartment over to you?" "No," Maggie answered, surprised by the strange questions. "That's it," Trixie said. "I'm helping you because I want to and I can do it. Remember, a person only helps you if they want to help you. Because we always have the right to say no. I like being your friend. I'm not the easiest person to get along with. Even if it doesn't seem that way at first glance. And you, how can I put it? You balance me out well. I don't feel any discomfort at your being here. On the contrary, it's a joy." "Thank you, Trix. I hope someday I'll be able to return the favor." "You're already paying," the girl said, "buying groceries and cleaning the house. I don't even have to mention the fact that you've practically freed me from cooking. And that's something I hate. But in the future I plan to tell everyone that I once lived with a celebrity from the world of high fashion." Maggie laughed. "Tell me about it. And I like cooking. I'm also thinking about the future when my daughter is born. I will stay at home for the first time. I don't know, a month, 2, 3, Maggie said. Stephanie made it clear that Cassandra would not wait for me 3 or even a year and a half out of maternity leave. "Wait," Trixie clarified. "I thought you'd be gaining experience with them through the summer until you went to college. There's a part-time program there. Then I could stay on and work at the fashion house." "Yes, that would be ideal, of course, but I'm just dreaming." Maggie sighed sadly. "I haven't yet had the opportunity to prove myself enough for Cassandra to say yes. That's our future star. I'll keep her on any terms." The friends laughed. "First of all," Trixie urged, "there's no harm in dreaming. Especially if the dreams are backed up by action. And yours are definitely backed up. Think about it. 6 months ago, you were a naive little country girl. I'm sorry, but you were." Maggie nodded, showing that she took no offense and agreed with her friend's words. "And now you are a young, confident mother-to-be, working in the most fashionable house in the city. Not a bad leap. And secondly, at the end of winter you will have some kind of show. Maybe there you can show yourself at least as a model?" Maggie thought. "Maybe you're right, if I can be useful. Eden said something about doing a maternity collection. Maybe she'll tag me in. Well, there you go." "That's great. What's your other news? Nothing else, Maggie answered, but she lied. Maggie saw her mother yesterday. Stephanie had sent her to pick up another box. It seemed to be terribly expensive and exclusive costume jewelry for a new photo shoot. You, girl, are not stupid, she said to Maggie. But just to clear your conscience, if you lose it, Cassandra's going to take 3 hides, and she won't care that she's pregnant. Got it? Maggie nodded. The valuable cargo had to be picked up from the 9th floor of the luxury shopping center. The brand representatives had an office there. Maggie had never been here before and was curious about the expensive boutiques, the elegant fountain on the 1st floor, the beautifully dressed customers. It seemed to her that all the rich women dressed very stylishly. Only 2 out of 10 women seemed tastelessly dressed. Maggie found this curious. She picked up the box with no problem and decided to take the large transparent elevator downstairs. It traveled slowly, stopping at each floor, so there was a chance to see a little more of the world of wealth that was new to her. On the 7th floor, a whole flock of very young girls entered, all carrying a bunch of bags. Maggie pressed herself against the transparent back wall of the elevator and turned to face it to continue her observations. Suddenly, a woman caught her attention. She was coming out of some boutique, accompanied by 2 tall, almost identical men in black, obviously security guards. The woman was wearing a light white dress. Luxurious blonde hair flowed lightly over her shoulders, and her large blue eyes looked somewhere thoughtful in the distance. It was her mother, though she hadn't seen her in over a decade. She hadn't changed at all. Maggie's heart raced and her legs gave out. She almost dropped the precious box. The elevator passed very close to where the dazzling beauty in white and her guards were standing. And for a moment Maggie thought her mother looked at her, and even recognized her. Her face flashed with either amazement or fear, but the elevator was barely moving the whole way. And then, as if by surprise, it flew downwards with an arrow and did not stop until the 1st floor. The girls with the bags got out, followed by Maggie. She didn't know what to do, rush back upstairs and start looking for her mother all over the mall. But then a bout of nausea came over her, and she almost sprinted toward the exit for fresh air. She felt a little better outdoors, and she wondered maybe this woman just looked like her. And I only saw her for a few seconds. My brain, flooded with hormones and suffering from hypoxia in the stuffy elevator, saw blonde hair, blue eyes, and slipped me what I wanted to believe. Nevertheless, the episode was now constantly in her mind's eye. Toward the end of January, Maggie began to realize for the first time that she was pregnant. No, psychologically she understood it, but with her body she felt only her daughter's periodic movements and all the things the other girls in the course had told her. And fatigue, weakness had bypassed her until that moment. Still, the term was not long. She became more noticeable. She didn't want to get up so early. It was harder to study. I wanted to lie down during the day. Yes, I've noticed. It's the first time, she said. Okay, Maggie, you need to regroup, focus on work, and do less housework. Who's going to do the housework? Do you work all the time too? She asked her friend. Why don't we invite Anastasia to visit for a month or 2? Maggie had met Anastasia's stepmother, Trixie, when she and her friend had gone to the village to celebrate New Year's Eve. She charmed everyone there. Stephen seemed to have literally fallen in love with her, and even regretted that he was leaving for a shift in a few days. The stepmother was unusually lively and friendly to the pregnant stepdaughter, showing unexpected warmth and care, and even the father was a little less somber than usual. Anastasia, Maggie tried to picture her stepmother in their city apartment. She wouldn't go. She has a household there, and her father won't let her go. She doesn't like the city. And she doesn't like me either. Her friend smiled slyly and averted her eyes. Maggie knew when to get that look. Did you too make a deal behind my back? She gasped. Not exactly a deal, Trixie said evasively. But before we left, we had this conversation. I told Aunt Anastasia that she could stay at my apartment if she wanted a break from country life. She was fine with it, and she was worried about you, by the way. Yeah, I could use the help, but taking it from your stepmother. Although there was no other option. All right, let her come. Inside, the girl was already prepared for the stepmother to annoy her with her reproaches, unsolicited advice and arguments, what Maggie does wrong and how it is necessary. But to her surprise, for the first 2 or 3 weeks the guest behaved quieter than water, but her help was very noticeable. Now Maggie could afford to get up an hour later. Breakfast and the obligatory container of lunch were already waiting for her on the table. In the evening they would flock back to the clean, cozy apartment, and even from the stairwell smelling the odor of homemade pies, or potatoes with mushrooms, or duck baked according to an old recipe. Yes, Aunt Anastasia, don't you have to lose weight? Maggie said cheerfully to her at dinner one night. There's nothing unhealthy about it, she replied. How do you know such recipes? Maggie wondered. Stephanie showed me how to look things up on the internet. I know that girls are watching their figure nowadays. And I read about pregnant women that it's bad for them to gain a lot of weight. It will be hard to give birth, and the baby will have a bad effect. So I started to look for a tasty and healthy way to feed you, Anastasia explained. Thank you, Maggie said sincerely. The stepmother looked embarrassed. Her cheeks flushed a little, and she waved her hand away. What else am I supposed to do all day? Just clean up and go to the store, that's all. It's boring just sitting around all day, so I'm looking for recipes. Suddenly, Maggie was seeing a different side of her stepmother. It was hard to understand what was the matter, whether she was finally resting from the hard country life, or from her heavy, silent husband. Either Maggie had grown up, and Anastasia no longer felt the need to teach her about life. As it turned out, her stepmother was a very caring and gentle woman who thought of others more than herself. Maggie realized, however, that she had always been like that. Anastasia had never neglected her stepdaughter, had never given her own son Stephen more than she did. Only she didn't know how to express her love and give affection, so necessary for a little girl growing up without a mother. Now she was interested in Maggie's life and work. Here is the edited text with dialogue highlighted and names replaced. At first secretly, furtively, she listened to Maggie tell her friend Stephanie about reading Coco Chanel's biography and looking for transparent square buttons. Then she started sitting next to her, then asking Stephanie the meaning of words she didn't understand. And Aunt Anastasia became almost like a second friend. They somehow easily found a common language, and with the easy hand of her stepmother, Maggie began to read books and watch movies. And the two of them even went out for a walk or two from time to time, if Maggie was busy. It was the day of the spring collection of Cassandra Shvedova's fashion house. The whole previous week had blended into one interminably long, hectic day for Maggie. She probably wouldn't have survived without Anastasia's magic pies and chicken cutlets, even though they seemed to be going pretty much on schedule. And Maggie, on the other hand, had expected to rest for a couple days before the show. However, the experienced Alice told her at once, "It won't happen. You'll see a few days before the show Cassandra will have enough of a fit. She'll be thrashing around like a tornado, tearing everyone and everything to shreds and screaming that everything is wrong. Get ready." Maggie couldn't believe it. The supervisor looked completely calm, but everything happened just as Alice had predicted. In exactly 1 week, Maggie walked into the studio as usual, bringing the last 2 boxes of shoes, and barely managed to dodge a purse flying past her face. "No," Cassandra shouted. "This is all completely wrong. This is terrible. This was a bad idea in the first place. They look like cows in those dresses. No one's going to take it. My career will be over at this show. The house will go bankrupt. They'll turn this place into a beer stand." Judging by the helpers in the corners, she'd been raging for a long time. Only Alice stood steadfastly beside her boss, apparently trying to say something to Maggie. Clenching her palms into fists for courage, She approached Cassandra with an innocent smile. "Cassandra, let's try it on me now," Maggie suggested in a sweet voice. The warden lit a cigarette. "What's there to adjust?" "Only if you put all these rags in a pile and set them on fire," she snorted. Stephanie glanced quickly at her assistants, and as if on cue, they began to praise Cassandra's genius. She pouted and rolled her eyes like a little girl. "All scoundrels. Traitors," she muttered. But it was obvious the flattery had worked. "Well, Maggie, put on those overalls." As Maggie changed and walked down the makeshift catwalk, her boss's face turned even more sour than usual. "Not that," she said. "What's wrong? I can't figure out." Maggie plucked up her courage again and said, "The belt is unnecessary. It's supposed to emphasize the waist. Except I don't have one, and it divides my figure ridiculously into two unequal parts. If you took it off, it would make the look softer and smoother." "I say." Cassandra ripped off the sewn-in belt with a few ruthless movements. "Yes, that's it." So they tweaked the entire collection in the time they had left. Even so, Maggie still felt a growing excitement, even though she had practiced. It was scary to imagine that she, a heavily pregnant girl from Sacramento, would be walking down the runway in front of a room full of people today. "What do you have to be afraid of?" Stephanie encouraged her. "Your boss is a beast. Aren't you scared of her too? And walking the runway is just a walk." "I'm sorry, but this is Cassandra's night, not your recital. You'll be looked at as one of many models, nothing more. They'll be looking at her every look under a microscope, looking for flaws and scrutinizing every detail." That reassured Maggie. Indeed, her business is to go out 3 times, walk along the path in a series of similar pregnant girls, among whom there are not even professional models, and quietly go to rest. But Cassandra will have to endure all the critics, competitors, journalists, and just those who want to express their opinions. Trixie and Anastasia came to support the young debutante. As a thank you, Maggie had prepared their images for the show herself. Trixie sat in a long emerald green dress that set off her curly red hair, while Anastasia wore an elegant light beige pantsuit. She even straightened her back. And no one would think now that this woman had lived in Sacramento all her life tending cows and a vegetable garden. Maggie didn't even remember her first entrance. The hall in front of her eyes merged into one big blur, and she only mechanically stepped over her feet and kept a trained smile on her face. When she came backstage, Stephanie hugged her tightly. "Well done, Maggie, good girl. That was awesome. Hurry up and change for the second time out." The second time was already a little calmer. She even found Trixie and Anastasia in the third row with her eyes and smiled at them. At the same time, a vague uneasiness came over her. Maggie didn't understand what caused it. Her stomach didn't hurt, so it definitely wasn't related to the baby. She seemed to see something in the hall. But what? "Maggie, get changed quickly." "You're locking up," Stephanie shouted at her. For the third time, even though she was going the very last, Maggie was absolutely confident. The show was almost at an end, and judging by Cassandra's satisfied smile, it had gone great. She could tell from the audience's reaction that they were enjoying themselves. Her eyes slid to the front row, and Maggie almost stumbled when she saw a fragile blonde in a dazzling black dress. It was her, there could be no doubt now. Her mother was looking directly at her. Maggie herself didn't realize how she didn't faint or drop everything and run to her mother right off the stage. On autopilot, the girl finished her walkthrough, remaining on stage with the rest of the models. She even seemed to clap and smile when Cassandra came out, and the audience greeted her with a round of applause. But Maggie herself didn't take her eyes off the woman in the front row. Her mother recognized her, she certainly did. Barely waiting for them to get off the stage, Maggie ran without even changing her clothes. The guests from the show had moved on to the adjoining room where the buffet was to be held. Maggie squeezed her way through the guests. Someone recognized her, complimented her, but she heard nothing, looking for the familiar blonde hair and black dress in the crowd. "Mommy," she finally shouted. There was no doubt now. She really hadn't changed much in 12 years. Maybe her cheekbones were a little sharper, and her eyes a little harder. "Maggie," the woman said gently and touched her arm lightly. She looked more frightened than pleased. "Did you recognize me, Mom?" Maggie asked cheerfully. "Of course you did, my girl. How could I not recognize my little one, even though you've grown?" Her mother nodded at her belly with a smile. "Are you getting ready to be a mother? I was hoping you wouldn't have it as early as I did." "Early?" Maggie asked, perplexed. Her mother looked away. Apparently, she didn't want to draw attention to them. Somewhere in the distance loomed the vaguely familiar silhouettes of men in black. Maggie remembered that they were the guards who had been with her mother at the mall at the time. "Let's step back a little," her mother asked affectionately. They walked through the hall and out onto the covered balcony, where it was warm and empty. Mother sighed, rubbed her temples, and apparently determined to tell the story began. "I wasn't even 17 when you were born," she said. Maggie had never thought of her mother being so young. Eden didn't know that. "I only told him at the registry office," her mother continued. "He guessed about you later," she added quietly. "Figured what out?" Maggie asked, "and then realized I'm not his daughter?" The mother lowered her eyes. "Yes, I was very young then, silly spoiled. My parents are very rich people. They never denied me anything. That must have played a part. When I became a teenager, I suddenly started to show character, drinking, smoking, going out with different bad guys. And then one day, I don't remember why, I had a fight with my parents and decided that I would run away from home and start a new life. I found a new friend and we started renting an apartment. I had money," the mother continued. "Then I found out I was pregnant, and that's when I met Eden. He was so simple, so honest, completely different from the guys I'd had before him. I decided it was the universe sending me a sign. And I left with him to Sacramento so my parents wouldn't find him. Got married." "Then you were born?" Maggie asked in a completely dry voice. Her mother looked at her guiltily and then averted her eyes. "I couldn't live there." The youthful fervor wore off quickly. "I realized I was too young to be anyone's wife, much less a mother." She suddenly took her daughter's hand, and she struggled to keep from tearing it away. "I tried, honestly," the mother continued. "If you knew how much I talked myself into staying every night. When you and Eden fell asleep, I'd look at you and say, 'Here they are, my family, my husband, my baby,' but I felt nothing. You were like guards keeping me in a cage I couldn't get out of." "Like guards?" Maggie asked, tears running down her cheeks. "And one day I just ran away," her mother continued, as if she hadn't heard her. "At first I wanted to leave a note, to explain everything to you and Eden, but I couldn't find the words." "In 12 years?" Maggie asked quietly. "You couldn't even send me a birthday card." Her mother lowered her head. "You went back to your parents? You didn't tell them about me?" Maggie asked. "No," replied the mother. "Do you know who my real father is?" She shrugged. "Honestly, I don't really remember anymore. I was going through a rough patch back then. And after I came back to the city, I never saw anyone else from that company." "Do you live with your parents now?" Maggie asked. Mom shook her head negatively and said very quietly, "No, with my husband." "Is that how he keeps me safe?" She shrugged her shoulders in an embarrassed sort of way. "He's a very rich man and very jealous," mother finished, lowered her lip, and said in a sort of pathetic, forgiving tone. I'd really hate for him to find out about you. You can't see me, can you? Maggie shook her head negatively. Her mother suddenly perked up and smiled. If you want, I'll introduce you to your grandparents. Oh, and you and I can see each other whenever you want. Then she looked back at the guards and added, well, maybe not very often, but I can call or write to you sometimes. Is that what you want, Mom? Maggie asked and looked her in the eye. Her mother looked both guilty and frightened at the same time. Maggie suddenly realized that she was not at all happy to see her daughter. She might have been glad at first, because she thought that now she would be relieved of the guilt that had been weighing on her shoulders for so many years. But now she seemed more afraid of what her rich new husband would think of her. Maggie averted her eyes, and through the glass door of the balcony she suddenly saw her stepmother, who appeared to be looking for her. Anastasia looked very agitated. Suddenly she turned her head and saw Maggie, and relief appeared on her face. And Maggie suddenly remembered vividly how she had gotten the flu when she was 11. She had had a fever of about 40, and her stepmother had stayed with her for 3 days, wiping her with a wet towel, drinking raspberry broth and broth, putting her big, cool, broad palm on her forehead. She also remembered the prom. Maggie had wanted to make her own dress then. She and her stepmother had gone to neighboring Vancouver and spent half a day at the market in the rain looking for the right fabric. When they finally found it, her stepmother haggled for a long time, knocking down the price. Then Maggie felt ashamed and embarrassed for Anastasia. It was only when she was paying that she noticed that her stepmother had taken the last of the money out of her purse. If she hadn't knocked down the price, they wouldn't have had enough for the purchase. Where had her own mother been all these years? Playing cranky daughter to her parents, who she hadn't even told they'd become grandparents. Her mother never grew up. She played family when she was young. When she got bored, she left her husband and daughter, easily tearing them out of her life, like a negligent student tears the spoiled sheets out of a notebook. Then she returned to her parents, pretending to be an innocent girl who had a little pity. Then found herself a new husband who would now cherish and protect her like the same little girl. How could she, Maggie, have been so blind all her life? You'll find Maddie twice more. The first time hard, then for real. It was now quite clear what those words meant. Maggie opened the glass door and stepped out to meet her stepmother. That's what you wanted to say, but you didn't have time, Maggie said as she hugged her tightly. What are you doing? Anastasia asked fearfully, gently stroking her stepdaughter's back. We lost you here. You were with some girl. Who is it, by the way? No one, Maggie answered firmly. Nobody. You picked a good name, Bogdana, Anastasia said, pushing the stroller with her granddaughter along the park path. God-given, just like her, all bright and smiling. Maggie smiled. Yes, her daughter was a delight to everyone around her. She had really been a quiet, sweet girl for 3 months. And Maggie had already started to go to work. Bogdana remained under the care of her grandmother and Aunt Trixie. A couple times she even took her daughter with her. Stephanie Swan suggested that Maggie take on the development of a children's clothing line after her vacation. So the boss said calmly, we've pretty much captured the maternity market after the spring show. It's only logical that they'll want to dress their children with us now. Maggie promised to think about the offer. After all, she's studying, albeit by correspondence, a child, a job. There's plenty to do. Of course, she couldn't have done it without Anastasia's help. Otherwise, it's been a joy. She didn't even go to Arizona for long, just to make sure her husband and the house were okay. And after a week there, she was asking to go back. Doesn't Eden miss you? Trixie asked her once. Anastasia shrugged her shoulders. Yeah, he's never been emotional with me. Even when we were married, he said, I'll help you raise your son, and you help me raise my daughter, and we'll keep the household in half. That's all love is. so I don't think she misses him. In the city, stepmother felt better and enjoyed walking with Maggie and her little granddaughter in the park. Maggie couldn't even call her stepmother. "Oh, what a beautiful car." Suddenly, the woman said admiringly, pointing to a black Mercedes on the opposite side of the street. Maggie looked at it and shuddered. The car seemed very familiar to her. A second later, a tall and very handsome young man with piercing dark eyes stepped out of the Mercedes, accompanied by a long-legged brunette in a short dress. She recognized him immediately. For the first second, she couldn't even believe her sensations. To make sure, she pressed her hand to her heart. It was beating evenly. Her breathing didn't quicken. Her legs didn't shake. I didn't want to faint or run into his arms. Yeah, Maggie didn't feel anything for Taylor anymore. The past. Don't go back to the past. Look to the future, she said thoughtfully, caught Anastasia's puzzled look, smiled, turned away from the car, and rolled the stroller into the back of the park.